Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku just wanted Kurogiri's tea instead of a fight? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku was tired. He had always been tired in a way since he was little. There was always that weight on his mind that made it hard to breathe, hard to move. But he always pushed through it, trying to lift his head and look at others with a smile even though all he got were glares and snarls of disgust in return. He would try to smile even though his skin pulled uncomfortably at burns and new cuts he got from school. He'd smile at his mom when she asked him how was his day, even though he knew he would have to go to the bathroom and change a bandage or two. Even though, that day at school he found another red spider lily waiting for him at his desk. He smiled at All Might, even though he could throw up from the phantom sensation of the sludge going down his throat. He smiled as All Might had left him on the roof and as he leaned a bit too far off the railing before noticing the explosions from afar. He smiled after being scolded for saving Bakugo, and he smiled when All Might told him he could become a hero. But even then, he was just so tired. When he got into UA, he felt like the weight had been lifted somewhat, and it wasn't hard to smile anymore. But slowly and surely, its presence became more obvious. Izuku found himself waking up to that same feeling as before. But he still smiled and no one could tell the difference. Even when he was treated for his injuries with Stain, he smiled at Ida and Todoroki in the hospital. But all he really wanted to do was yell at the police, maybe yell at Ida some more, and tell Gran Torino to stop Fang hitting him with a cane. But he didn't. Instead, he was polite to the police, apologized, and closed his eyes to sleep that never really came. His mom, of course, was working as usual. Ever since he went to UA, she started taking on more shifts and spending time outside the house. Izuku didn't really notice though. For a long time, his relationship with his mom had become more distant. He still loved her, but over the years it came to the feeling that someone has towards a distant family member that only visited every few years. He wouldn't be surprised to learn that she felt the same way. She still fed him and gave him enough money for an allowance and to get food when she wasn't home though. But he knew that he wouldn't really understand or experience how Kirishima would talk about what he and his moms did over the weekend. So it was no surprise that, yet again, he had to go buy some canned soup or maybe a microwave dinner when he got a text from his mom saying she would be on a business trip for the next 2 weeks and that there were no groceries at home. He wasn't going to buy groceries so late at night, but he was still hungry, so he made his way to a convenience store. The cashier didn't even give him a second glance, already used to seeing him come at odd hours. Izuku went down the aisles, got 2 cans of soup, a notebook, and a new pen. At one point he thought he saw someone he recognized watching him, but when he looked there was no one there. So he paid and walked out of the store. It had only been a few seconds that he was walking down the dimly lit sidewalk when everything went black and he felt the familiar sensation of the warp from Yi. When he could see light again, he saw that he was inside a lit bar and that he was in front of Shigaraki. He gave a quick glance around the room and saw Kurogiri along with some other people, probably villains or not, who knows. Izuku didn't really have the energy to say anything else but, oh. When they had warped the green-haired hero student to the bar, they were ready for a fight or to at least have to knock him out. They remembered how he had fought during the sports festival and it wasn't a secret that he had managed to take down Stain who approved of him. They were ready for him to come at them quickly, with green lightning surrounding him and pressure in the air. They were not ready for the tired blank face as he looked at them and simply said, oh, while carrying a grocery bag. There was no green lightning, there was no shock, there was no anger. There was just a teenage boy in a hoodie with dark circles to rival Eraserheads and a plastic bag. There was no panicking or questions. Instead, he greeted Kurogiri and Shigaraki like they were simple acquaintances and not people he actively fought against in the past. Hey Shigaraki. Kurogiri, Midoriya said bluntly with tired eyes, how you guys been? No one said anything, they were still tense, waiting for him to do something. When no one responded, Shigaraki watched as Midoriya looked around the bar the other people in that were there. Green Eyes looked back at Red. Who are the newbies? He asked. Shigaraki didn't get to say anything before twice, Toga, Compress began to introduce themselves in an energetic way. Spinner followed suit and so did Magna, a bit calmer. Meanwhile, Dabi didn't say anything until Midoriya just kept staring at him and he finally let out a quick, "Dabi." Midoriya took one of his hands out of his hoodie pocket and gave them a quick wave. "Cool, nice to meet you guys. Now is there a kitchen?" He lifted up the plastic bag he had. "I was just picking up my dinner and I'm still hungry so." There was still a bored-looking expression on Midoriya's face as he waited for an answer. In the end, Kurogiri told him about the kitchen and led him to it, keeping a close eye on him for obvious reasons. Everyone watched him go. Midoriya didn't seem to mind. While they heard the sound of something being done in the kitchen, Dabi turned to Shigaraki. "Hey dustfuck, what the hell is up with that kid?" Shigaraki scowled in annoyance and reached out a hand to Dabi, who easily dodged it. "How the F should I know?" He looked back at Midoriya, who was in the process heating up some canned soup while Kurogiri kept an eye on the hero brat. Shigaraki was confused. This kid was not the same kid he fought at USJ. This kid didn't have that spark in his eye. Instead, the boy's eyes were dull when he arrived at the bar and he didn't seem to have any reaction to suddenly being face to face with a villain who in the past almost killed him. After a couple of minutes, he watched as Midoriya came out of the kitchen with a bowl of hot soup and took a seat at the bar with no hesitation. If someone were to come in unaware of who anyone was, they wouldn't have known that Midoriya had just been essentially abducted. Instead, Midoriya just looked like a tired kid who eating soup for some reason in a bar. And God, did that kid look tired? Shigaraki wondered why. A second later, Shigaraki saw the glint from a knife that Toga threw at Midoriya. The kid managed to catch it and looked at Toga. "Nice try, but please don't do that when I'm eating." Shigaraki waited for another knife to be thrown or some manic smile to take up Toga's face. Instead, she simply smiled. "It should be all right." Surprisingly, Midoriya sent her a soft smile before going back to eating. Everyone was oddly quiet as they watched the hero student eat, each of them waiting for something to happen. "Did we just kidnap a kid to have him just eat soup?" Magna asked Compress. "I do not know, but it is quite a scene to see, is it not? Do you see how the boy greeted Shigaraki and Kurogiri? Quite interesting indeed." Compress responded. Magna looked over at Shigaraki, who was looking at Midoriya with an odd look on his face, and the others who were watching Midoriya with a close eye. It seemed that no one really knew what to do with the situation at hand, other than Midoriya, who seemed to be enjoying his soup, despite the company he had. Eventually, there was no more soup. A few minutes after finishing, Midoriya looked up at Kurogiri, who was down the bar rearranging some glasses again. "Kurogiri," Midoriya called. The misty man looked towards the boy. "Yes, Midoriya? If you don't mind, can I have some tea?" he asked. The mist that made up the villain's body seemed to freeze for a second before returning to its regular movement. "You want tea?" he asked as if he was unsure of what he heard. Midoriya nodded. "Yeah, I don't really mind what kind of tea you have." He paused. "It's fine if you don't, I'll take water too." Kurogiri reassured Midoriya quickly. "No, I believe there is some tea." And the other villains in the bar watched with confusion as the Kurogiri prepared Midoriya a cup of tea with what could only be described as excitement. When Kurogiri handed Midoriya a cup of tea, he told him that it was chamomile. Midoriya chuckled a bit. "That obvious that I need some sleep?" "Indeed so, young man," Kurogiri replied. Midoriya only hummed and smiled in response while taking a sip of the tea. The others watched the odd interaction until twice asked about what they had just said. "Chamomile tea helps you sleep, dumbass," Dabi said, "and the little hero here has dark circles that like a Dimon raccoon. I think they look cute on him." Toga said, "You think blood looks good on people?" "So, Shigaraki, why am I here?" Midoriya asked calmly after taking a sip of tea. The casual question surprised everyone for a moment before they looked at the leader of the LOV. They could see Shigaraki think for a moment and look at the TV in the back of the bar. He turned back to Midoriya. "Tell us about you, about All Might and his weaknesses." Midoriya sighed. "Sorry, can't help you there. Teachers and administration don't exactly tell us about the weaknesses of the school, and I avoid dealing with them as much as possible." "What Ash? And All Might?" Midoriya continued as if he didn't cut off a villain who could decay him with just 5 fingers. I guess he's partial to American slang. I've heard him curse a lot in English. I don't think he likes spicy food, and he's kind of not the best teacher. Midoriya took another sip of tea and shrugged. So yeah, those are a few cons to the guy. The next thing that was heard was laughter, and Midoriya turned to see Dabi cackling while Shigaraki tried to decay him unsuccessfully. Off to the side, he could see Twice switching between shaking with laughter and being still. Toga was just looking at the scene with an amused face along with Magna. And Compress had put a hand to his mouth like he was trying to hide a smile, despite the mask being in place. When it was obvious that the flame user wasn't going to be reduced to dust, Shigaraki turned back to Midoriya. You know more. You're his successor, Sensei told me so. Ha, successor, Midoriya scoffed. The green-haired boy thought about how All Might told him he wanted him to be the next symbol of peace, to announce himself at the sports festival, how he told him he would do his internship with Gran Torino. It made him feel bitter with how the man hadn't even asked what goals Izuku had as a hero or asked where he would have wanted to do his internship. If your sensei thinks that I'm going to be the next symbol of peace, then he's wrong. Midoriya looked down at the teacup. I have no plans to do that, he said quietly. Everyone watched as Midoriya seemed to slump down at his own words, and Shigaraki began to question if Sensei had been wrong. He looked back at the TV and saw that there was a light on, meaning that Sensei had been listening, but there was no voice that came out. Before anyone else could say anything, Spinner asked a question. What do you mean All Might isn't a good teacher? Stain himself called him a true hero, so wouldn't he be good at teaching future heroes? At this, Midoriya set the cup of tea down with a soft yet solid thud everyone heard, and he turned around in his seat. 1. Midoriya held up a finger. I have a lot to say about Stain's philosophy. He was right to a degree about heroes' motivations, but the killing I do not agree with. So with him thinking that All Might is the definition of a true hero, I can point out some flaws with that thinking. He held up another finger. And 2. Just because you are good at defeating villains and saving people does not mean you are skilled in other areas. In All Might's case, the man is a lousy teacher. He's never received any formal training in education and doesn't even have a license. I'm actually surprised that he's teaching at UA. Also, if he was a mentor, I don't think he'd be good at adapting how he was taught and his way of doing things according to his mentee, Midoriya said, knowing full well that All Might had not been doing the best job when it came to teaching him, if his many broken bones had anything to say about it. Midoriya looked at the villains who were still staring at him. He looked at Spinner. So Spinner, does that answer your question? Spinner nodded, albeit a bit unsure it seemed. Hey kid, Magna suddenly said, drawing Midoriya's attention to her, shouldn't you not talk trash about him, especially to a bunch of villains? Why not? Midoriya replied. If anyone is actually going to believe me and listen, it would be you guys, wouldn't it? I'm pretty sure I would have already gotten a punch to the face or some quirk used on me for talking shit if I was talking to someone at UA or Heroes. You're expecting that from Heroes and from students at UA? Compress asked in disbelief. I've gotten hit and have had quirks used on me for doing things less serious than talking bad about Japan's #1 hero, Midoriya said nonchalantly before turning to take another sip of tea. He really liked how Kurogiri made it. When he turned back around, he saw once again odd looks on the villains' faces. Are you okay, kid? Twice asked. Before, in a different voice, he said that he didn't care. Midoriya let out a huff of air in amusement and smiled. Nope, he said before taking another sip of tea. Despite being villains, or people who have done questionable things, none of them particularly liked the look they saw on Midoriya's face when he answered Twice's question. There was a sort of resignation in the kid's face that didn't fit with the image that they had of him in their minds. For Shigaraki and Kurogiri, it felt wrong to see it on his face because they had only seen bright eyes and a fierce determination. They remember how he looked in the heat of battle at the USJ attack. But that look wasn't there. Instead, the hero brat looked as if he didn't care about what would happen to him at that moment. It crossed Shigaraki's mind that if someone else were in danger, Midoriya's face would look different. Meanwhile, for Compress, Spinner, Magna, Toga, and Dabi, the look on Midoriya's face wasn't anything that they were expecting to see. They had all seen snippets of Midoriya from the sports festival. They saw the power that he inflicted with just one flick of a finger. When Midoriya had been warped, they had expected a fight with a UA student full of energy and righteousness. But they hadn't gotten that at all. Instead, they watched as a hero student that had fought Shigaraki and Kurogiri greet them like they were old buddies. Then went and used the kitchen in the back to heat up their soup. Why the kids even had soup or was buying it so late was another question. None of them even knew that the bar has something other than alcohol and maybe water until Midoriya had asked Kurogiri for tea. Shigaraki didn't have an answer to explain Midoriya's behavior either. They saw the look of confusion on his face when Midoriya essentially talked trash about All Might. None of the information he gave was actually going to be useful in the takedown of any heroes. Unless they somehow defeated All Might with spicy foods, which didn't seem likely. Everything that came out of Midoriya's mouth threw them for a loop, and they were confused when Shigaraki had said that Midoriya was All Might's successor, that his sensei had told him so. The others knew that sensei was Shigaraki's boss and that the man was not meant to be messed with. But Midoriya confidently told them that he was not planning to be the next symbol of peace, which any successor to All Might would be. How Shigaraki sensei could be wrong, they didn't know. They left it alone though, as Spinner asked more about All Might and Midoriya went on a whole explanation as how the number one hero was someone that should not be teaching at all. And even though the kid said a lot, they had a feeling that he might have been holding back. They would be right in thinking that. The villains weren't at all ready for him to answer their questions with brutal honesty. They sure as hell weren't ready for Midoriya to tell them that he thought it was fine to tell them his opinions because they would actually listen and not hurt him. They weren't ready for him to talk about being hurt by others like it was nothing. Twice asked him the question that was on everybody's mind. "Are you okay, kid?" They saw Midoriya smile as if the question that Twice asked was something funny. "Nope," he said before taking another sip of tea. The bar was oddly quiet for those few seconds after hearing that one word. Various thoughts ran rampant in everyone's mind. What's wrong with this kid? Why does he look so tired? How can he be so calm right now? Why hasn't he fought back? These were the things they were going over in their heads before they were interrupted by Toga's voice. "Oh, Izuku-kun, if you're sad, do you want a hug? Do you want to stab someone? That always makes me feel better." "Thanks for the offer, Toga," Midoriya said, seemingly not bothered by the nickname or the brutal offer, "but I don't think stabbing someone will help me feel better. And I don't think a hug would be the safest option since you might stab me and it would be uncomfortable for anyone to hug me." Midoriya looked around at everyone as if showing Toga that no one was offering to hug him. No one was. They were just standing there awkwardly as they saw Toga pout and look at them with a familiar glint in her eye that made them feel the need to watch out for knives that may start coming their way. After a couple of seconds, they heard Midoriya burst out into laughter. It sounded genuine despite the boy's appearance. "Don't worry, I don't expect any of you to actually hug me to make me feel better," he smiled. "Pretty sure that's the last thing you want to do. Although," he paused and turned to Kurogiri, "I'm almost finished with this tea, do you mind making another?" "That's no issue at all," Kurogiri responded. "Thanks." Shigaraki had gone to the corner with a pensive look on his face while the others started to have a conversation. Kurogiri meanwhile was making Midoriya's second cup of tea, still in a way that made the Misty Man look like he was happy to make it. Midoriya even seemed to be enjoying watching the warp villain make it. At some point, they all saw Midoriya take out the notebook that had been in the grocery bag. When Toga had went over to Midoriya, who effectively dodged the knife she threw, she saw the beginning of a sketch of the teacup Midoriya drank out of earlier. "It's so pretty, Izuku-kun. I didn't know you could draw." Midoriya smiled a sad smile. "Thanks, Toga, I used to draw a lot, but haven't been able to for a while. I'm glad to see that the drawing isn't horrible, even if the lines are a little shaky." Toga frowned at the words Midoriya was saying and she looked at Midoriya's hands. She could see that his fingers were a little crooked and the scars. She suddenly remembered how in the sports festival it looked like Midoriya had broken his fingers multiple times against Todoroki. Before Midoriya could see Toga's frown, she smiled and leaned against him, making him chuckle. "Well, I still think it looks pretty, Izuku-kun. Can you draw me something later?" "Sure, Toga." Toga squealed in delight when Midoriya agreed, and she jumped before running over to Dabi, who had been watching the scene with a careful eye. What was that all about, Toga? The flame user asked. Dabi watched as the smile on Toga's face disappeared and was instead replaced with something a bit more serious. I think Izuku-kun is hurting, she pouted. Dabi snorted. I think that much is obvious, Toga. The demon kid said he wasn't okay. Kind of confusing, to be honest. Dabi looked over to the hero student who was sitting on the bar doing something in his notebook. His attention was brought back to Toga when the girl poked him. I know that. He's hurting in another way though, and it isn't fair. I haven't even got the chance to cut him and he's hurting. What other way are you talking about? He tensed when Toga grabbed his hand and the girl ran a finger along where his bones were. His hands, Dabi, she said softly. Before she could say more, Twice was pulling her away to talk to Compress. Dabi looked at his hand and felt the phantom sensation of Toga running a finger along his skin. It was odd. Usually he had to avoid knives trying to cut or stab, but instead Toga had been gentle. The way she spoke was without the usual manic tone. She had spoken calmly and softly. He looked back at Midoriya. The demon kid was confusing him. Nothing was making sense since Kurogiri had warped him to the bar. And now Toga was acting weird talking about the kid's hands. The conversation that Twice had dragged Toga into somehow became a lecture from Compress about the art of magic. Everyone was perfectly fine to hear the man speak about it, occasionally having Twice add on since the man also knew about magic. And for some reason, Midoriya was knowledgeable about magic as well, and he absent-mindedly joined the conversation. I think the special part about magic tricks is the idea of something impossible being done and the mystery. It's nice to imagine things like that. It adds something to the normal world people live in, even if it's just for a moment. Midoriya had said. No one said anything except for Compress. Wonderfully said Midoriya. It pleases me to see such acknowledgement from someone so young. Midoriya sent the masked man a smile before turning around to drink the freshly brewed tea Kurogiri set down. They all watched him as Midoriya closed his eyes for a few moments while holding the teacup in his hands. Kurogiri, who had the clearest view of Midoriya's face, was surprised to see such a reaction to someone drinking something he had served them, and he felt the odd urge to pat Midoriya's head. The boy just looked so tired. Despite this, the conversation continued and changed topics to types of knives. Toga was the most enthusiastic when this topic came up. Although, at some point in the conversation, they were interrupted by the ringing of a phone. Everyone's heads whipped around to look at Midoriya, who took the phone out from his pocket and answered it in a fluid and quick movement. Everyone in the bar seemed to freeze and just stared at Midoriya as the boy greeted the person on the call. Oh hey mom, Midoriya said casually as if he didn't have a room full of villains looking at him with wide eyes. They could all hear a woman's voice asking Midoriya where he was and telling him that it was late. The woman had apparently never gotten a notification from their security system that Midoriya had gone home that night. Oh, one of my friends needed my help with something, so I went to their place and lost track of time. I think I'll have to stay here since it's so late, Midoriya said, in a cheery tone that didn't match how he sounded earlier. They watched as the boy listened to his mother with a sullen expression on his face. It seemed that his mother had a lot to say, as Midoriya didn't really speak much until a few moments later. Yeah, I got the money you left, I'll be fine. See you when you come back. Bye. Midoriya hung up and put his phone back into his pocket. Then Midoriya turned to look at the others, who all had dumbfounded looks on their faces. What? You just told your mom you were with a friend when you actually got kidnapped by the League of Villains? Dabi replied like it should have been obvious. Oh, Midoriya said dumbly, I didn't really think she needed to know. Everyone kept looking at him oddly. Didn't need to know? Spinner asked incredulously. Why wouldn't your mom need to know you've been kidnapped? Midoriya looked at them with a calm face. It's not like she could do anything about it, and it's not like you guys are killing me or something. I've been in worse situations than this. What the F dash? Dabi muttered. Midoriya, what do you mean you've been in worse situations? Magna asked, thinking that being kidnapped by villains would be bad enough to garner a call to a parent. Also, a small part of Magna had felt concerned for the young boy, seeing as he was around Toga's age, who she had grown to be a sort of big sister to. Well, none of you are using your quirk on me or hitting me, all my bones are unbroken, there's no one calling me names or telling me to die, and you haven't killed me yet, Midoriya shrugged before drinking some more tea. Midoriya looked at Kurogiri with a smile, and Kurogiri makes really good tea. As Midoriya continued to sip his tea, the others in the bar were looking at each other with a mixture of confused, what the F dash, faces. Honestly, were they even sure that they got the right kid? This couldn't be a student from UA. Because surely UA would not have a student who seemed a little too comfortable in the presence of villains. Right? Shigaraki got up and took a seat next to Midoriya at the bar. Kurogiri, give me a drink. Kurogiri didn't even look up from his rearranging of glasses. No. Shigaraki growled, and the thud of his forehead as it hit the bar counter could be heard. Midoriya looked at the villain who was next to him and seemed to be in distress while sipping his tea. I can leave if I'm bothering you guys. That didn't seem to be the right thing to say, as Shigaraki groaned from his place at the bar. Then Dabi chuckled, walked to the bar, and asked for a drink from the warp villain. Unlike Shigaraki, Kurogiri didn't hesitate to serve the man some alcohol. Shigaraki cursed but didn't move from his spot at the bar. Kurogiri could see that Midoriya was smiling as the boy sipped his tea. Izuku really did like how Kurogiri made his tea. He's had tea before, even made some himself. But none of it seemed to be as good as the one the warped villain had made for him. At first, Izuku had seen his mom make herself tea and how she seemed to enjoy it. She never did offer it to him. So he had thought that maybe she just didn't know if he would like to try it. It was after about a week that Izuku got up the courage to ask his mom if maybe she could make tea for him too. The look that she gave him made the weight in his chest feel heavier, and he regretted asking her. It was like she had looked at him like he was an inconvenience, like it was the biggest annoyance to be asked to make tea for her son. She usually ignored him or treated him as a distant relative, but at that moment she showed something else. It was a look that reminded him of the ones his teachers showed him at school or any of his classmates did when he greeted them. It was a look that reminded him of the spider lilies that would be found shoved in his bag after it was left unattended or simply laid out on his desk. Maybe he asked on a bad day, or maybe she had simply been in a bad mood. But after that incident, he taught himself how to make tea. Although, it didn't taste as good as Kurogiri's. So having Kurogiri not look at him that way, and actually seem happy to make him tea, made it feel nice when he picked up the teacup. The heat seeped into his hands and he closed his eyes, feeling content. The heat helped with the ache in his hands. They had started to ache more after he had finished his drawing. He hoped that they wouldn't hurt so bad after drawing Toga something. Despite throwing a knife at him and not so quietly talking about his blood, she had been nice. And she had called his drawing pretty, so he didn't mind making a drawing for her. He went over the different ideas of what he could draw for her while finishing the cup of tea. The whole time, making sure to keep his hands around the cup as long as possible. The tea must have finally taken effect, as Izuku had to open his eyes when he heard someone chuckle. He hadn't noticed that he had fallen asleep. Midoriya, I believe the chamomile tea has proven effective, Kurogiri said while standing in front of him across the bar counter. To Izuku, it actually looked like the man was amused. When he went to respond, he was interrupted by the need to yawn, which he couldn't hold back. Izuku chuckled when he finally stopped yawning. I think I'll have to agree with you, Kurogiri. Thank you again for the tea, it was really good. It was my pleasure, the man said before taking away the empty teacup. Izuku watched the man walk away, and then he looked beside him where Shigaraki still had his head down. His hair was splayed out, there were some parts that looked tangled and needed to be brushed. The funny thought of what hair routine Shigaraki had crossed his mind. Just because you're a villain didn't mean that you didn't use shampoo, conditioner, or even leave-in hair conditioner. Feeling sleepy and not very caring about what others may think at the moment, Izuku set his head down on the bar counter with his right arm as his cushion. He was facing Shigaraki. The man hadn't moved a bit. Izuku wondered if maybe Shigaraki was tired like him. It wouldn't have been a surprise. Being a villain and avoiding getting caught by the law sounded stressful and tiring. He wouldn't be surprised if Shigaraki was actually asleep next to him. He's not one to judge. So Izuku stared at Shigaraki's head, and with his tired, muddled mind and uncaring attitude, he reached out his fingers to touch the bluish-gray strands of hair. He started playing with them. Shigaraki didn't seem to notice. Izuku didn't seem to notice. Dabi, who started choking on his drink after seeing what Izuku did. With the growing sense of weight on Izuku's mind and eyelids, and the surprisingly soft strands of hair between his fingers, he fell asleep. What the actual F dash? Oh my god, what the F is going on? Spinner whispered to Compress. All eyes were on Shigaraki, who hadn't moved from their heads-down position, and to Midoriya, who was next to him asleep, one hand previously playing with the villain's hair. Playing with Shigaraki's hair. Twice had laughed when Dabi had started choking on his drink when Midoriya first started messing with Shigaraki's hair. Everyone else had froze, fully expecting Shigaraki to decay the hero student on the spot. But that never happened. In fact, Shigaraki hadn't moved. Was the guy even aware that his hair was being touched? I've wanted to play with Shiggy's hair. Toga whined before starting to walk towards the two before Magna pulled her back. Nua Toga, I'm pretty sure you'll risk getting either yourself or Midoriya decayed if you go over there. Compress spoke before Toga could say anything more. Yes. It is intriguing to see the young hero still breathing after doing something so bold. Do you think that perhaps our boss has fallen asleep at the bar? He has not moved for a while now. Unbeknownst to them, Shigaraki had not fallen asleep. In fact, he was wide awake with wide red eyes. He had been too surprised to move when he felt someone touching his hair, and even more so when he realized that it was from the hero brat himself. But Shigaraki couldn't bring himself to move or tell Midoriya to stop. The thing that Shigaraki couldn't even deny was the fact that it actually felt nice. There was also the fact that he figured the kid was too tired to even consider the implications of what he was doing. Because why in the world would a hero student from UA play with a villain's hair? A villain who freaking kidnapped him. Honestly, what the hell was up with this kid? It was obvious that the hero brat was depressed, but really? Was it to the point where they seemed at ease with villains that could kill him in a blink of an eye? Did he have that big of a death wish or simply not care enough about what would happen from messing with his hair? When Shigaraki felt Midoriya's fingers stop moving, he thought about what he was supposed to do. Should he get up angrily, act as if nothing happened, or stay there and maybe actually just sleep at the counter? He chose the second option. When he rose, gently pulling the few strands still among Midoriya's fingers, everyone froze. Shigaraki avoided looking at their faces, already knowing the smiles or wide eyes that they would have. Instead, he looked at the boy sitting next to him. Midoriya was fast asleep. Apparently, the boy's own arm was a good enough pillow as he seemed to be completely comfortable. He looked at the scarred hand that was only moments ago in his hair. It was odd, Shigaraki thought, that this kid, this future hero, one who would probably kill someone with one punch, one flick of a finger, as he saw in the sports festival, was asleep in his bar. Had drunk Kurogiri's tea and played with his freaking hair. It didn't make any sense at all. Shigaraki hadn't been expecting any of this when he kidnapped Midoriya, and now he felt at a loss to what even do. Shigaraki turned to the others, making them jump in place at the sudden motion. "Keep an eye on him," was all he said before walking away and to his room. Everyone except Kurogiri watched as Shigaraki walked away. When he was gone, Twice was the first one to speak. "Do you think he was embarrassed?" Compress brought a finger to their mask. "Possibly. I do believe he simply acted as if nothing happened to avoid speaking about it." "What do you think, Kurogiri?" Everyone turned to look at the warp villain to get his response, given his closer connection to Shigaraki. But they froze when they finally looked at him. Kurogiri was reaching over to ruffle Midoriya's hair. The man would only have to close a gap of a few inches to touch green hair. Green hair that for some reason just looked so soft. "Hey Misty Man, what you doing there?" Dabi called out. Kurogiri seemed a bit startled at Dabi's remark and withdrew his hand. I am unsure what came over me." "Ah, I want to touch Izuku-kun's hair too." "I want to touch it too." "No, I don't," Twice said. Both Twice and Toga ran towards Midoriya. But, before they could lay one finger on green hair, Spinner had grabbed them by the collar. "You don't just go touching people's hair." Spinner scolded them. Toga pouted and looked from the hanging position that Spinner had her in, but Izuku-kun touched Shiggy's hair. Spinner sighed. "I really don't know how to respond to that, other than Midoriya is not what we expected." "That's putting it lightly," Dabi muttered. The others nodded in agreement. "Okay, but are we just going to let him sleep at the bar?" I feel like he'll get a crick in his neck. Magna said. They all looked at Midoriya, who at the moment looked comfortable. Sure, the bar counter may be comfortable for a few minutes, but any longer with the weight on your arm and neck at such an angle was just asking for a rude awakening. Not that they should care at all. They were supposed to be one of the bad guys, the kidnapped Midoriya after all. They shouldn't be concerned about how his arm was going to fall asleep. They shouldn't feel uneasy after listening to everything that the kid had said, or how he seemed so uncaring in the presence of villains. No, they shouldn't care at all. So why on earth were they discussing who was going to be the one to either wake him up so he could sleep somewhere else, actually physically move him somewhere else, or simply leave him there? I could put him in a marble and move him, Compress suggested. No. That'll just wake Izuku-kun up. What if we just woke up him and led him to one of the booth seats? Spinner asked, pointing at one of the empty booths. They're soft, aren't they? All right, but who's going to wake him up then? Dabi asked. Everyone just looked at Dabi. The flame user frowned and crossed his arms. You're joking. What if he wakes up and tries to kill me? He won't kill you, Dabi. Maybe not, but I don't feel particularly inclined to be at the end of his quirk. Oh, come on, Dabi, Spinner said. If anything, Kurogiri is right there, so he'll make sure that if Midoriya attacks you it won't get anywhere near you. Right, Kurogiri? They looked at the misty villain. If that is necessary, he responded. Dabi huffed. Fine, but I'll burn your buttes if the little brat tries something. Then he made his way towards Midoriya. From a few seats away he called to Midoriya. Hey brat. That's not his name. Toga hissed. Ugh, fine. Midoriya. No response. In a louder voice, Dabi called out to him again. Midoriya, wake up. Still no response. Dabi looked at the others and just waved a hand pointing at Midoriya. See, look, I tried, now can we just dash? Wake up, Midoriya. Twice practically screamed at the sleeping boy. Everyone turned to look at Twice, who slapped a hand over his mouth. Spinner punched Twice in the arm in annoyance. Then they looked back at Midoriya, fully expecting to see green eyes looking at them and maybe the boy frowning at being so rudely woken up. That was not the sight they were met with. Instead, Midoriya was still fast asleep, showing no reaction to being yelled at. Seems the young hero is still asleep, Compress said. Kurogiri, you gave him chamomile tea to help with his sleep, did you not? Yes, I did. Chamomile tea is very useful for helping with insomnia and making sure that the sleep you get is restful. Wow, Izuku-kun must have been really tired if he's still sleeping. Even if he didn't drink tea, Toga said, walking up to the boy. She looked down at his face and poked his cheek. He didn't react. Toga giggled. Oh, come on, he can't be sleeping that deeply, Dabi said before coming towards Midoriya after Toga stood back. He brought up a hand and poked Midoriya's cheek. When the kid didn't react, he poked him again. And again. And again. Dude, why are you poking him so much? Spinner asked. Dabi shrugged his shoulder and looked back at Spinner. I don't know. 'Cause he's literally not reacting, and like, how does someone not react to someone poking their Everyone jumped at Dabi's yell and saw the reason why. Midoriya's left hand had grabbed Dabi's hand, the one that was poking him. Dabi was trying to pull it away, but the scarred hand wasn't budging. Dabi, are you having trouble getting your hand back? Magna asked, smiling. Just laugh it up, but this kid is FNG strong, even in his sleep. Can't get him to be let go. Is he hurting your hand? Compress asked. Dabi glared at Compress. No, but I want my hand back. Then just take it back? They could practically hear how Dabi ground his teeth together, as he let his head drop before speaking. I can't. What do you mean you can't? Spinner asked. Is he using his quirk or something? At that question, they all took a closer look at Midoriya's hand. They looked for signs of lines lighting up to green lightning. There were none. Compress hummed in interest. It seems the young hero is not using his quirk. Dabi sighed and sat down in the seat next to Midoriya, his hands still trapped by the green-haired boy. This cannot be happening. Compress let a hand drop on Dabi's shoulder, smiling behind his mask. Oh, but it is. For the first time in a long time, Izuku felt comfortable while sleeping. There were no nightmares. No flashes of red dripping from flowers onto his hands. or red dripping from the rooftop ledge where his shoes were set neatly next to each other. There was no red from eyes that looked at him with hate he could never truly understand. There was no red from burned skin and cuts, or from blood staining the cloth Yagi-san carried with him. There was no red dripping from the katana in Stain's hands or pooling underneath Ida's pierced hero costume. There was no red slowly staining his uniform. Izuku didn't hate the color red, but whenever it showed up in his dreams, it was never good. So it was a nice change to see that it wasn't making an appearance in his dreams. That it was not making him want to stay awake and avoid the sweet call of sleep. He could barely feel any aches in his hand. Instead, it actually felt quite warm. Warmth in the past had always meant burns, explosions, and pain. But this warmth was soft and didn't burn. He made sure to pull it closer. He could feel it chasing away the aches, and he slipped deeper and deeper into unconsciousness. At one point he could have sworn he heard someone whispering something, as if it was in his head. 9th. Izuku. Please rest. Sleep will keep the nightmares away. With that, Midoriya slipped away, burrowing into the warmth that seemed to now surround him. When Shigaraki had finally come out of his room, it was to hear Compress say, "Oh, but it is." The sight of Dabi looking defeated, while his hand was being held by Midoriya. Midoriya, who was still asleep. "Why is the brat holding your hand?" Shigaraki heard Dabi mutter, "How the hell should I know?" before Toga was coming up to him with a frown on her face. "Izuku-kun's name isn't Brat. Don't be so mean to him, he's really nice. What I call him shouldn't matter. Wah, he's pulling your hand closer." Spinner started laughing, pointing at Midoriya. When Shigaraki looked back at Dabi and Midoriya, he could see how the boy was pulling Dabi's hand closer. It almost looked as if he were trying to cuddle the flame user. "It's not funny, Spinner. I can't get him to let go." Shigaraki raised an eyebrow. Can't get Midoriya to let go? How hard could that be? As if she could read his mind, Magna explained. Apparently the green bean is strong. He's not even using his quirk, but we haven't been able to get him to let go of Dabi's hand. The little guy isn't even hurting Dabi's hand, but he's damn strong for someone that small. Shigaraki turned to look at Kurogiri, who was calmly cleaning some glasses from across Midoriya behind the counter. "Is this true, Kurogiri?" "Yes, Tamura." Midoriya fell asleep and they tried to wake him up, to no avail. Then he grabbed Dabi's hand and has not let go. "Oh, don't tease me, dustfuck." Dabi sneered at Shigaraki. "Do something to get the hero you wanted to kidnap to let me go." Shigaraki scowled. "Fine." Then he pushed through the others and put a hand on Midoriya's face. "Hey W dash. No, stop. Kill him. Oh dear. What the foo dash." Shigaraki closed his eyes at all the yells from everybody. "Calm down, I wasn't going to decay him." Figured he'd wake up, but he's still asleep. Shigaraki could feel the soft breathing from Midoriya against his hand before he took it off Midoriya's face. He really did think that if anything was going to wake up the kid, that it would have been his quirk. Midoriya had already seen it in action, and what it could do. Except the hero student showed no sign of waking up, even when his life could have been ended if Shigaraki simply put his pinky down on the kid's freckled face. "I guess he isn't going to wake up," Shigaraki simply said, completely ignoring everyone's affronted looks. "Yeah, thanks for pointing that out and scaring the shit out of me, you a-hole." Dabi glared at Shigaraki. "Now what the hell am I supposed to do with this?" He gestured to the green-haired boy. "Get comfortable?" Compress snickered along with Spinner. "I should just set you all on fire. See what's so funny about that," Dabi muttered. "Oh come on, Dabi. Izuku is just holding your hand and he looks really happy sleeping. Maybe you could move him somewhere more comfortable and then he'll let go." Toga suggested. "And where exactly would that be? The couch or maybe Shigi's b-dash? I am not going into Shigaraki's dusty but room. Probably give Midoriya and goddamn asthma attack. Last option is the couch, Dabi." Magna said. Dabi raised his free hand in exasperation. "Sounds fine to me." But the man didn't move. "Dabi," Spinner said, "you're going to have to move Midoriya there since he has your hand." Dabi sent him a deadpan stare. You expect me to somehow get this kid all the way to the couch by myself, even though he has what seems to be an unnatural grip in my hand? Is that what you're telling me, Spinner? 'Cause I want you to think real hard about what you say to me. Ugh, you know what, I'll help you get him into a position to carry him, alright? Spinner nervously said before letting out a sigh of relief when the flame user didn't react badly. What happened in the next few moments was truly a sight to see. Spinner had first lifted Midoriya's head to put him in an upright position. But in doing so, he forgot to support the boy's head as it started to fall backward. The boy's body started to lean back against the small backrest. A backrest that would not stop the boy from falling off the chair. Luckily, that was narrowly avoided by Magna stepping behind him and steadying his head with her hand while another hand was on his shoulder. Oh wow, his hair really is soft. Toga poked Magna. I wanted to touch Izukuin's hair. Toga, now is really not the ti-dash. Magna was interrupted by the sound of Dabi muttering curses at Spinner. Apparently, Spinner had pushed Midoriya a little bit too far to the left and therefore into Dabi. Magna had been distracted and didn't stop Midoriya's upper body from falling into Dabi's chest. The look Dabi was sending towards Spinner was balanced out by the fact that Midoriya seemed to look even more comfortable leaning against his chest. Spinner, I swear to God, you better wipe that smile off your face before I burn it off. Spinner brought up a mouth to cover up his smile that didn't seem to be going away. And he tried to speak through the laughter that was starting to come out as well. I'm sorry, I can't. It's just that he looks so comfortable and oh my God, he's pulling your hand closer. It can't. Please don't burn me, come on man. Spinner's plea was less than convincing due to the fact of the tears coming out of his eyes and the smile he had stopped trying to hide. Also because alongside his plea Dabi could hear the various snickers and laughs coming from the others in the bar. Even Shigaraki had a smirk on his face and Kurogiri somehow looked amused. Meanwhile, Dabi was attempting to ignore the fact that Midoriya seemed to be pressing himself closer to his chest and pulling his hand in more. When they heard a silent mumble of "warm" come from the green-haired boy, they had to dodge the flames Dabi sent towards them. That didn't stop them from laughing though. Look like the bra Midoriya likes you, Shigaraki said, eyeing the knife Toga suddenly started playing with. Dabi snorted and looked down at Midoriya. The kid's cheek was pushed up against his shirt and it looked like he was smiling. He could feel the green hair brushing against his collarbone. And was it soft? Magna wasn't kidding, he thought. It reminded Dabi of when he used to carry one of his siblings around after a tiring day. They had always curled up into him because of how warm he was. Dabi never thought he would be experiencing the same thing since getting all the scars he did. They tended to deter anyone from getting close to him. But there he found himself, in a bar with a bunch of villains and a freaking hero student sleeping against him like a demon cat. Spinner, help me with his legs so I can take him to the demon couch already. After few more moments and Dabi glaring at Spinner, Dabi managed to pick Midoriya up. It had taken some thinking considering how the kid wouldn't let go, but they managed in the end. Toga had been quick to compare Midoriya to a princess from the way Dabi was holding him. Yeah, well, this princess isn't exactly light, so get out of the way. It seems that the hero will not let go anytime soon, Compress said. It didn't take a detective to know that the man was smiling behind his white mask. When Dabi had finally made it to the couch and set Midoriya down, the boy did not let go. In fact, he had almost pulled Dabi onto the couch when he tried to pull away. So there Dabi was, sitting on the couch with Midoriya's head on his lap, as the kid now had a firm grip on his left arm. Toga sat right beside the flame user as she wanted to play with Izukuin's hair. Meanwhile, Dabi was nursing a drink that Kurogiri had so graciously given him. He smirked when he caught Shigaraki eyeing his drink. Shigaraki gave Dabi the bird before going back to playing on his game console. It was rather late, but Shigaraki didn't feel like sleeping, not that he usually has issues with sleep. Apparently, it was a little different for Midoriya. Shigaraki didn't think that green-haired boy would have stayed asleep the way he did if he had actually gotten a decent amount of sleep. Looked like the hero student didn't. Once again, questions about the kid came up in his mind. When he had warped Midoriya to the bar, he had been expecting to get answers or possibly a hostage. Instead, he got a depressed teen that slept like a rock and liked to be warm while sleeping. He really was jealous that Kurogiri had given Dabi something to drink but not him. Instead of drinking, he took out his frustration and confusion on the boss of the level he was on. The whole time he kept glancing up at Midoriya and Dabi. Toga had fallen asleep and was moved somewhere more comfortable by Magna. The woman was the only one who could effectively avoid getting cut whenever someone needed to move Toga after she fell asleep somewhere. Kurogiri was also another one, but the man had to use his quirk to do so. Shigaraki had to do a double take when he glanced up to see Dabi messing with Midoriya's hair. What was with everyone in hair tonight? Careful that your staples don't get stuck, Shigaraki said. Oh, shut up, you'd probably end up decaying the kid's hair. Dabi sniped back. Titi was all Shigaraki responded with before he went back to his game, while Dabi went back to messing with Midoriya's hair as the boy slept. Midoriya's hair really was soft, Dabi thought. When Izuku woke up, it was slow. There was no gasp for breath and there was no scream that died in his throat. Instead, there was the sensation of something messing with his hair and warmth. He groaned and moved his face from whatever he had burrowed into. When he moved, the hand in his hair stilled and disappeared. Izuku decided to open his eyes. He found himself looking up at the man who had introduced himself as Dabi. He had black hair, turquoise eyes, and scars that were held together by staples. From his position, Izuku realized that he had ended up sleeping on Dabi. Huh, didn't expect that. Morning, princess, Dabi said. To him with a lazy smirk. But Izuku could see how Dabi's eyes were trained for any sudden movement if he decided to try something. Not that he would. He was rather comfortable after all. Morning, Dabi. The whole time while he was sleeping, the kid had been on top of him. Dabi had attempted a few more times to escape during the night but failed each time. Then he simply accepted his fate and entertained himself by messing with green curls on the kid's head. He was careful though not to get any stuck on his staples. It can be a beach to get things out of there without making him bleed. It was early in the morning when Dabi saw that Midoriya had started to wake up. The sun had yet to even rise. He was a little surprised that the kid would wake up so early. But as he looked at Midoriya's face and the dark circles, he figured it was probably normal for him. When Green Eyes looked up at him, Dabi had expected Midoriya to spring off of him in a hurry. But instead, they just looked at him. There was barely any reaction from him. Morning, princess, Dabi said. The comparison that Toga had made was stuck in his mind. Maybe that would get a reaction from the hero student. But he got nothing. The demon kid just looked at him with a blank face, eyes that somehow still looked tired, and said, Morning, Dabi, like it was completely normal to wake up in a villain's lap. Oh, is Izuku-kun awake? Dabi saw Midoriya's eyes move to look at Toga, who plopped down next to him on the couch. Dabi smirked. Yeah, princess finally woke up from their slumber. Princess? Midoriya asked while Toga beamed. Yeah, Izuku-kun. When Dabi carried you, you looked like a princess. It was super cute. It was an interesting sight to see Midoriya smile slyly and look back up at him. Does that mean you're my knight in shining armor, or are you the villain who stole me away? Dabi laughed. I think I'm more fit for the role of the villain, to be honest. I think the armor would be uncomfortable. Dabi was surprised to see a thoughtful look cross Midoriya's face. You're right, armor isn't the most comfortable and kind of limits your movement along with stealth. Wish Ito would have thought about that already. Before Dabi could answer, Spinner's laughter rang out in the bar. Dabi saw the others come in. None of them were particularly deep sleepers or consistent with the amount of sleep they got. So it was no surprise to see everyone awake, Kurogiri the longest considering his constant manning of the bar and cleaning glasses. Where's the young hero? Compress asked. Spinner hung off the back of the couch and looked down at Midoriya. Still on Dabi's lap. He's awake now though. The next person to come from the back of the couch and look down at Midoriya was Compress. Oh, why hello there. Midoriya smiled. Hello. Looked up a man wearing a black balaclava mask. Even with the mask, Izuku could see that the man had hazel eyes and a pointed nose. Izuku knew that this was Mr. Compress and he smiled at being able to see his face, even if he couldn't see the man's hair. Hello, he said to the magician. Compress smiled at him and he saw hazel eyes flit to Dabi before returning to him. Young hero, are you aware that you are resting on a villain? Specifically, Dabi, which I can't imagine is very comfortable. Izuku left out a huff of amusement at the way Compress spoke. I'm aware, Izuku said, and saw a flash of amusement cross Compress's face. Dabi quirked up an eyebrow. Then don't you want to move? Izuku shrugged from his laying position. Nope. Oh, quite a bold young man you are, Compress said and brought a hand to hang above Izuku. In the next moment, appeared a blue marble that had not been there before amongst the man's fingers. It was a smooth, pretty thing. I shall gift you this for providing a very entertaining show last night with Mr. Dabi, and for continuing to be so entertaining even before dawn has broken for the new day, Compress said, before dropping the marble that Izuku caught easily. Izuku brought the marble closer to look at it, and was pleased by how it seemed to shine. He was brought out of his thoughts when Dabi chuckled. Of course, Compress would thank you for trapping me to the couch last night. Trapping you? Spinner pushed Dabi's head out of the way with a big smile to answer Izuku's question. Oh yeah, we were trying to wake you up but you weren't, and then Dabi started poking your face. A lot. And while he was doing that you actually grabbed him. We couldn't get you to let him go, even when he took you to the couch, so that's why he's still here and no dash. Spinner was cut off when Dabi pushed his face away. So yeah, you trapped me here by clinging to my goddamn hand like it belonged to you. Oh, well, it's because you're warm and comfy. Helps with my hands, Izuku said simply. While Izuku could hear snickers from Shigaraki and Toga, Dabi looked at him dumbly. What? Izuku brought up a scarred hand and turned it. He used his other hand, finally letting go of Dabi, to run his finger along his crooked fingers. Izuku thought of the warmth he felt while sleeping and how it chased the aches away. Green eyes met turquoise when he spoke. Heat helps with the aches in my hands. You're warm, ergo, you made the chronic pain in my hand go away. That's probably why I didn't let go. Not often I get to sleep without pain. All heads whipped in Midoriya's direction when they heard him explain. Dabi remembered how Toga had grabbed his hands and told him that Midoriya was hurting. Kurogiri and Compress thought about how they had seen the green-haired boy hold the teacup with both hands and looked so content. Shigaraki remembered how there were scars on the hand that had played with his hair. Spinner and Magna realized why Midoriya had not let go of Dabi. Does it hurt you really badly, Izuku-kun? Toga asked, with clear concern in her voice. They saw as Midoriya waved her off. There's good days and bad, he would have appreciated a heads up from Recovery Girl about that pain, but I'm sort of managing now. Dabi here is being a big help, funnily enough. Despite the tone of his words, there was no happiness on Midoriya's face. Instead, there was bitterness and resignation. This kid was in pain and he somehow found comfort in a villain. It was an odd thought to think about. It was after a few more minutes that Midoriya looked up at Dabi and said, You know, you're no longer trapped by me, so if you want to get up, you can. A look of realization swept across Dabi's face before Midoriya started laughing, even as Dabi quickly pushed the kid's head off his lap and got up quickly. A muttered, finally can use the effing bathroom, could be heard as Dabi made his way towards the designated room. Toga joined Midoriya's laughter. When she was done, she hovered over Midoriya's face. From his angle, she must have looked upside down. Do you want some breakfast, Izuku-kun? The boy in question seemed a little surprised at the question, but he responded, Yeah, that'd be nice. The next hour or so was filled with everyone requesting different food items from Kurogiri, as the poor man was the one to get them food. Although the misty villain seemed to be in a better mood when Midoriya had thanked him. Midoriya, would you also like tea when I return? Kurogiri asked before leaving. Midoriya seemed to beam at the offer and nodded his head yes. With that, off Kurogiri went to procure breakfast for a group of villains and the hero student they kidnapped. Twice went to talk to Shigaraki. Hey boss, what do we do with the kid? We should kill him, he hasn't given us any useful information. Shigaraki sighed. We aren't going to kill him twice. The kid is useful and important to UA. Then shouldn't you ask him questions? Kill him. Tamura rubbed at his eyes and resisted the urge to scratch at his neck. Twice was right. He should be asking questions, but he doubted whether the kid would give him important information to use against the heroes. So should he kill him, torture him for answers? No, that didn't feel right. After all, when he decided to kidnap the boy, it was on a sort of whim. The League had been getting antsy and tensions had gotten a bit high. He had been hoping more for a fight actually, something to let loose. But that whole plan was thrown away once Midoriya had said hello. Was he mad about it? No, not really. More confused and for some reason concerned? It was an odd feeling. Shigaraki turned to look at Midoriya, who was watching Toga now draw in his notebook. Midoriya, he called. The boy turned to look at him. Yes, Shigaraki? You're not going to give me information to use against the heroes, are you? He asked. For some reason the smile Midoriya sent towards Shigaraki looked sad. No. I won't. I'm not going to help you bring any heroes down. Unless it's Endeavor, then maybe I could give you some info to give him some trouble. Endeavor? Yeah. The guy is an absolute flaming D that causes more damage than the villains he goes after, Midoriya said, using air quotes on the word villains. Shigaraki smiled at the description and so did Dabi. Honestly, he's such a bad example of a hero. He doesn't know the difference between a scared civilian that had an accident with a quirk and a killer. He chases and burns both with zero hesitation or consideration. The damages he does to public and private property is ridiculous. A simple robbery could end up with someone's grocery store catching on fire. The man is a walking fire hazard, too proud to turn off flames that make civilians uncomfortable. Honestly, I just want to dump a cold bucket of water on the man to make that FNG mustache beard thing disappear. And don't even get me started on the treatment of his family. Midoriya clenched his fists. And the others in the bar stopped smiling when they heard the anger in Midoriya's voice. A hero should know how important family is, but Endeavor he treats them like tools only to be discarded when they have no use. Midoriya practically spit out that last part. The silence in the bar was suffocating and Midoriya suddenly sprung up and looked around at everyone's serious faces. They saw something akin to fear in those green eyes. Sheet, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, I'll just go dash. Midoriya got up and started to head towards the bathroom. But he was stopped when Dabi placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Midoriya seemed to freeze in place. Magna, who was off to the side, saw how wide Midoriya's eyes went. Kid, Dabi said. Midoriya flinched but didn't move away. He didn't seem to move at all, there wasn't even a rising and falling movement of his chest. Dabi furrowed his eyebrows and pulled his hand away, noting how some of the tension in Midoriya went away and how the boy seemed to breathe again. Don't you remember? We're villains, so don't apologize for talking shit and the truth about heroes. Weren't you the one that told us that if anyone would actually listen, it would be us? Dabi asked, in a teasing tone. When he saw Midoriya nod, Dabi grinned and nudged Midoriya forward. All right, now go to the bathroom. I'm pretty sure you need to use it, so go. When they heard the click of the bathroom door closing, they finally spoke. You all saw that, right? Magna asked. The way that he got heated enough about Endeavor and then freaked out when he realized he did and tried to run away. The way he froze like a scared animal when Dabi touched his shoulder. Yeah, I think we all saw that, Spinner said. It seems the young man thought we would hurt him after his little tirade. Compress said, even though he did indeed inform us before that we would be the ones to actually listen to such a thing. For a moment, I don't believe he was seeing us. Didn't Izuku-kun say that he got hurt by others a lot, for things less than talking about heroes? Yeah, he did. Shigaraki said, still looking. In the direction that Midoriya had went. Well, that's fed up, Dabi said, taking a seat at the bar. If anything, I completely agreed with the kid's criticism of the so-called number 2 hero. He completely froze up when I touched his shoulder. Creeped me out 'cause nothing before has fazed him, but that made him stop and breathing. Just what the F had happened to him. Izuku tried to calm down his breathing in the bathroom, but it was like the breath was caught up in his throat. His lungs suddenly forgot how to do their job. He looked in the mirror and hated the tears he started to see form and he angrily wiped them away. Izuku pushed his hands against his eyes, willing for the tears to stop, even though he knew it was useless. He set his elbows in the bathroom sink and rested his head in his hands. Tears slipped through his fingers and fell into the sink. His throat grated and he screamed through clenched teeth. Although, not loud enough to be heard by the bar's occupants outside. God, how could he be so stupid? How could he forget that he wasn't at his old schools, that Shigaraki, Toga and the others weren't his old classmates, that they weren't his old teachers? He knew that they wouldn't have been mad at him about ranting to them about Endeavor. But he got caught up, his thoughts going back to Todoroki, hearing the way his father had spoken to him. How closed off and angry Todoroki had been, enough to cut himself off from half of his ability. Izuku remembered the way Endeavor spoke to him, poking at the connection to All Might and reiterating the fact that Izuku wasn't Izuku, he was stand-in for All Might. Someone for Todoroki to beat. Never mind his own dreams or ambitions, as if that mattered. The anger overwhelmed him, muddled his thoughts and his vision. He forgot who he was with, and when he saw their faces, he didn't see them anymore. He saw the faces of the other kids in his middle school, his teachers. He saw the faces of disgust and anger they had whenever he opened his mouth. He saw their gritted teeth and furrowed brows after he criticized any hero. He saw the faces and the heard echoes of the insults that were thrown at him as a group of kids held him down and beat him until he couldn't breathe. All because they didn't like what he had said. All because he had poked holes in their perfect image of heroes. God forbid he talked about All Might. He could feel the sting of the cuts he had gotten that day after school. He could feel the sting of the slap that his teacher had given him in class saying, "How dare you speak about All Might that way, or any hero at all? Your kind has no place to say anything about them. You should learn to keep quiet, no one wants to hear such ridiculous disgusting things from a quirkless boy. It's an insult." When Dabi had set a hand on his shoulder, the warmth no longer felt comforting. Instead, it was too hot and he could hear the phantom pops of Bakugu's quirk. He could smell the smoke of the blonde, burning his uniform and skin. All the while he couldn't move, grip too tight, too hot. But Dabi wasn't Bakugu, and he had removed his hand. He spoke to Izuku in a light teasing tone. Not the loud brash way Bakugu yelled at Izuku and made him flinch as the words and insults practically hit him. No, he wasn't at school. He wasn't in Aldra. He wasn't surrounded by old classmates and bullies. It wasn't red eyes that looked at his face. It was turquoise. He was in the bar. He was with Shigaraki, Dabi, Toga, Twice, Mr. Compress, Magna, Spinner, and Kurogiri. He drank Kurogiri's tea, played with Shigaraki's hair, slept on Dabi. Mr. Compress gave him a marble. Toga called him Izuku-kun, not Deku. Twice spoke in two voices. Spinner asked him about All Might. That's where he was, that's what he had to remember. Because it was better than where he had been in the past. Like he said, he's been in worse situations than this. When Kurogiri returned, he quickly noted that one particular child was missing. He's in the bathroom, something happened. Kurogiri remained silent, waiting for someone to explain. Compress was the one to fulfill that role, and Kurogiri couldn't help the way his eyes sharpened at the implications. Despite only knowing the child for a little while, the first meeting was during a DMN attack. Kurogiri had started to feel a fondness for him. It was odd, and he had a feeling that the fact that when Midoriya had asked for tea had been the start of it. In fact, he was excited to make tea again this morning. But of course, he would have to wait for the young man himself to come back from the bathroom. Which eventually he did. But when he returned, any sign that he had slept was gone. The dark circles seemed to have darkened and now Midoriya's eyes seemed puffy. There was a slouch in his posture and Kurogiri could see slight trembles in the boy's hands. The young man sat down at the bar, avoiding meeting anyone's gaze until Kurogiri had set down the breakfast sandwich that he asked for in front of him. "Thank you," Midoriya had said. But Kurogiri could hear the rasp, much different to how he sounded earlier. He noticed how Midoriya brought up a hand to his throat. He would make sure to make slippery elm tea to help with what looked like a sore throat. The boy must have been quite upset to have a sore throat, Kurogiri thought. It reminded him of Shigaraki after he had gone on a screaming tantrum when he was younger. While everyone was eating, Kurogiri could see the glances being sent towards Midoriya. When he made Midoriya's tea and set it down in front of him, Midoriya simply froze and then smiled sadly. A single tear fell from his eye as he picked up the teacup with both hands. When Midoriya drank it, Kurogiri could see realization come to Midoriya about what tea it was and what purpose it served. And more silent tears fell. Things were silent until Compress and Spinner started a card game. Eventually, when Twice joined, noise slowly came. Back to the bar. Dabi took a seat next to Spinner to help Twice cheat. Midoriya and Toga had moved to a booth seat and the boy was watching her draw again in his notebook. Magna soon took a seat next to Toga and Shigaraki took a seat next to Midoriya. Shigaraki was pleased to see the color return to Midoriya's face as the boy made comments about the various drawings Toga drew. The girl had a penchant for flowers and knives. There were a couple of murder scenes she drew that had made Midoriya laugh. Magna had also taken the pen and drew small designs along the corners. At one point, Midoriya gave Shigaraki the pen. "Why are you giving me this?" Shigaraki asked, careful to hold the pen with only 2 fingers. Midoriya smiled at him. "To draw, everyone at this table had drawn in the notebook here, so you're next." Magna and Toga both agreed with the hero student. The notebook was slid right in front of Shigaraki, and 3 pairs of eyes stared at him, waiting for him to set the nib down on the paper. But before that could happen, a phone rang. And just like last time, Midoriya had whipped out the phone with ease and answered it without any hesitation. Izuku was not at all surprised by the phone call he got from his mom again. Ever since he was little, despite being ignored, she always kept tabs on where he was. Always saying she needed to know where he was causing trouble. Never had been to check on how he was feeling, always to check up on what he had done. So even though he wanted nothing more than to simply let the phone ring and got to voicemail. But that would only be followed by more phone calls and the growing urge to use OFA to crush his phone. So he answered, putting on that fake cheery tone that made him want to scream. "Hi, Mom." "Izuku, where are you? There's no alert that you've gone home yet. Just how long are you going to be at your friends'? Surely they don't need you that long. I know it's the weekend, but I don't need you to be getting into trouble. I can't have you causing issues when I'm away." Inko said to him, annoyance clear in her voice. Izuku frowned and held back from sighing as Inko would be able to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm not getting into trouble. I've just been with my friend, helping them out. Actually, it's really important that I'm here to help them out. Their parents even offered to let me stay for the rest of the weekend. I promise I'm not causing trouble," Izuku explained, essentially pleading for her to just let him stay and stop asking questions. He waited with bated breath for her response. "So what, you're just planning to burden another family?" She sniped at him through the phone. Izuku said in a breath like he had just been hit. Inko continued, "You better not cause trouble. I don't need another call about you. I'm trying to work and yet you make things so difficult by making mistakes. Is that all you're good for, Izuku, causing trouble?" His grip on the phone tightened. "No." He heard her huff on the other side of the line. "Fine, stay there for all I care, but don't you dare cause issues. Can't believe you're causing me stress and I'm not even there. Goodbye." "Bye." Then she hung up. He let out a shaky breath as he put the phone back in his pocket. With how quiet the bar had gotten at the sound of the ringing phone, what Midoriya's mother had said to him had been clear as day. They heard the unkind words the boy's mother said to him. They saw the tension that had finally left, return and settle back on his shoulders. It was disappointing and frustrating. But who were they to do anything involving him? It was their fault that his mother had called him, wasn't it? But was it their fault for the words she spoke, for the tone she used? Was it even Midoriya's fault? No, it wasn't. Now they didn't know what to do. But before anyone could try something, they heard a grunt from Shigaraki as the man nudged Midoriya. "What do you want me to draw, brat?" Shigaraki jumped when Toga kicked him under the table and Midoriya smiled. "Buildings, draw me a bunch of buildings. Draw a city far away from here," he said. Shigaraki looked at those green eyes that still looked dull and he nodded. Careful to not decay the pen or notebook, Tamura began drawing a city. One that was far, far away from here. Later on, Midoriya ended up sitting with Compress. The man was showing Midoriya his various masks. It was amusing to see Midoriya hold each of them up with the utmost respect and care. Compress was very pleased with this. Compress, though, was pulled away when Toga and Twice took one of his masks. The man was quick to chase after them. The chase ended when Kurogiri gave them food. Apparently the man had stocked up on his trip in the morning. mostly due to the fact that he hated leaving the bar for too long. Who's to say it would be in the same state he left it in? Dabi had finished eating first and sat on the couch. Not soon later Midoriya joined him. The boy sat right next to him, clearly settling in and keeping his hands close to the flame user. Comfy there, princess? Dabi smirked. Yup. Dabi then brought up a hand and let out some fire. The blue flame danced in his hand. How about now? Scared, wanna move? Dabi looked away from the flame to look at Midoriya's face. He was surprised by what he saw. Midoriya's eyes had been dull for the most part since the night before. But now they were looking at the blue flame with such intensity. They almost seemed to glow. Pretty, Midoriya whispered out, seemingly in awe of the flame. Dabi's face screwed up into confusion and he tried to look for the signs of a lie or joke in the boy's face. But he didn't find any. The way Midoriya had said pretty was completely new to him. Ichimik was the sound that Dabi let out before extinguishing the flame. He noticed how the shine hadn't completely disappeared from Midoriya's eyes. He didn't see how those eyes slowly closed and Midoriya fell asleep until he felt the pressure of Midoriya's head leaning against his arm. Magna laughed at Dabi's face when he finally realized what predicament he was in again. Compress laughed while saying, "Oh, how the young hero has trapped the villain once again, how delightful." Dabi smiled and then he caught Toga's eye as she had come to look at Midoriya. He beckoned her over and signaled he wanted to tell her something. When she leaned down, he whispered something in her ear. The smile on Toga's face was full of delight as she bounded over to Shigaraki. The next thing the red-eyed villain knew was that he was being pulled and then pushed onto the couch next to Midoriya. He sputtered at the action only to freeze when Dabi pushed Midoriya to lean on Shigaraki. Then Dabi stood up, sending an sheet-eating grin to Shigaraki. "Be careful not to decay the kid dustfuck, he's sleeping." Shigaraki gave Dabi the finger as the others laughed. It wasn't very often that Izuku got to sleep during the day. The closest he got to that was in class, but he never let himself have his eyes closed for 2 class. No matter how tired he was listening to the teacher explain a concept he already knew, he kept his eyes open. Izuku was familiar with what could happen to you if you were unaware of your surroundings for too long. He remembered being startled out of sleep with a hit to his head, or a loud noise right by his ear that left it ringing for the rest of the day. He remembered once that when he opened his eyes, his middle school class was gone. Or at least that's what he thought before he opened the door and found them waiting for him with smiles that only promised pain. The teacher was nowhere in sight. And the teachers, they loved to call him out and give him extra work for falling asleep in class. Extra work that made him stay up late, another thing that didn't let him sleep other than nightmares. It was an endless cycle, one that has slowly become obsolete at UA. Despite having fallen asleep in class, none of those things happened. The closest was when a paper airplane that Siro had made hit his head. The boy apologized of course when it startled Izuku so much he fell out of his chair. The odd thing that Izuku had noticed since going to UA was that never once was he woken up by the sound of explosions. Ida had been quick to tell him that he and his other classmates never let Bakuga do that, as it's incredibly rude to wake someone up like that. The teachers never gave him extra work. Instead, they told him to get more sleep and to try his best to not let it happen again. Aizawa-sensei had even asked him if he was having issues sleeping, or if he needed to talk to Hound Dog or Recovery Girl. It had been surprising to hear concern and suggestions for better sleep to come from the man that consistently took naps throughout the day. But despite this, Izuku didn't let himself close his eyes too long anywhere unless it was time to go to bed. Although that never guaranteed he'd get any sleep. Except now he was sleeping, yet again amongst villains. What a funny situation he was in. But even funnier was the fact that he was having an odd dream. At least it should be a dream. It didn't feel like any dream he had before. He found himself in a seemingly never-ending expanse of black smoke and a hard floor. He himself seemed to be made up of this smoke. He found that he didn't even have a mouth. And not very far away from him were lights. In fact, he could barely make out their figures. But what he could hear was snippets of voices carried over by wind that seemed to be coming out of nowhere. "Is not okay. Just look at him, he dash. Just what is the 8th doing? Dash am worried about him. 8 he's here. The dash. It sounded like multiple people talking, but he could barely pick the voices out. He couldn't hear them clearly. He wondered who they were talking about. Who was the eighth? Worried about who? He looked down at his body made of smoke and the blank expanse before him. Despite never dreaming this or seeing a place like this, he had the feeling that he should know. He looked back to the lights and blurry figures. For a moment he thought he saw one of them more clearly. A woman? Then, like before when he had fallen asleep after drinking chamomile tea, someone whispered in a soft voice. But this time it wasn't inside his head but rather right by his ear. "It's okay, Izuku, we can wait a little bit longer. Don't worry, we'll still be here." Then Izuku found himself feeling like he was being pulled away from wherever he was. When he opened his eyes, he found Toga smiling at him. And he noticed that he wasn't as warm as he had been before. Actually, wasn't he leaning towards his right before? Midoriya removed his head from whoever he was leaning on to his left. Then he looked up. Red eyes were looking at him through bluish-gray strands of hair. Shigaraki. He had been taking a nap leaning against Shigaraki. Dabi must have left at some point and somehow got Shigaraki to replace him on his other side. Shigaraki hadn't said anything yet and was just looking at him. He hadn't moved either. Not feeling particularly inclined to move himself, Izuku simply looked back down and put his head back to its original position, leaning against Shigaraki. Toga's smile somehow got bigger. Shigaraki had sat with Midoriya sleeping against his arm for a total of about 45 minutes until the kid had woken up. He hadn't known how to react when Midoriya simply looked at him with those green eyes and then went back to leaning his head on him. Again, it made Shigaraki think about what was going on in the kid's mind. Because who in their right mind would just go back to leaning their head on him? Why didn't Midoriya move? The thought of he has a death wish crossed his mind. It made him feel uncomfortable when the theory didn't seem so far out. Shigaraki was all too familiar with the thought of death. And here was Midoriya who was towing the line by doing things that should have resulted with him getting seriously hurt or even killed. Shigaraki wouldn't have hesitated to decay anyone else if they had touched him. Dabi was similar with his fire. Toga, of course, was quite talented with a knife. Midoriya even had to catch one of the knives she had thrown at him when he first arrived. Spinner could have killed Midoriya for criticizing Stain. Twice could have decided to listen to that other voice. And Magna or Compress could have simply decided to kill him. Midoriya could have already been killed multiple times since being warped to the bar. But it seemed as if he didn't care. He looked at them with dull eyes and a tired face. He didn't hesitate to be close to them or say things that could have easily gotten a bad reaction. By all means, the hero student should be dead. Yet somehow he wasn't. That was the thought running through Shigaraki's mind, other than how it felt nice to have someone lean on you. He looked down at Midoriya, who was watching Toga. The girl was showing him knives that she seemed to pull out of nowhere. Tamura found it amusing how Midoriya had something to say about her knives. Toga seemed to appreciate it, though. It wasn't often that she got to go on about her knives. When she had in the past, she would start to get a little bit too enthusiastic, but for some reason Midoriya had a calming effect on her. Even though Midoriya had ruined his plans with getting information or letting off steam by fighting, he in a way lessened the tension that had built up in the group. Maybe it was by giving them all something to focus on. Or by introducing them to someone new who wouldn't kill them. Or maybe it was by simply confusing the hell out of them. Whatever the reason, Midoriya's presence helped. Although, it left them with many questions and unpleasant thoughts regarding the green-haired boy. The rest of the day was rather lackluster. At some point, Magna had left with Twice Spinner and Dabi. Shigaraki had gone to his room. Toga drew more in Midoriya's notebook while Compress watched. Izuku watched them for a while before returning to the couch. When the others returned, they had a meeting that Izuku was not a part of. It took a while and the day was getting late. Eventually the sun went down and the moon went up. A few of them went to bed or took up a spot in the bar by themselves. Izuku himself settled back to the bar while Kurogiri was in his usual spot behind the counter. He flipped through the notebook, looking at the drawings. He was amused by Toga's flowers and Magna's designs that were next to drawings of people getting stabbed. Izuku spent a few minutes looking at Shigaraki's drawing. He had told him to draw him buildings, a city that was far, far away from here. Shigaraki delivered. Izuku hadn't known that Shigaraki was good at drawing, albeit a little rough around the edges, could be explained by his quirk. The city Shigaraki had drawn was surrounded by grasslands. The buildings twisted and connected in different ways. There was a mixture of tall and short towers. It was a small city bunched up together, only to suddenly end once you got to a certain point. After that point, there was only tall grass that would sway in the wind. Izuku ran a finger along the lines of the buildings and grass. He imagined how it would feel to go to the edge of Shigaraki's city and lay down. To look up at the sky and see the ends of the grass against the blue while just in the corner of your eye was the glint of metal from one of the buildings. Would anyone even be able to see him lying in the grass? Could he just disappear amongst the grass that swayed in the wind? It was an enticing thought, to just disappear. But Izuku couldn't do that. He closed the notebook. "Kurogiri," Izuku said in a small voice, and the misty man looked at him. "Can I have some tea? Not chamomile though, I don't think I want to sleep tonight." "Are you sure, Midoriya? I insist that you sleep." Izuku smiled sadly at the man. "I'm sorry, but I don't think sleep will be kind to me tonight." Kurogiri's form seemed to flicker at Izuku's statement, but not a second later was the man preparing him tea. When Kurogiri set the tea down in front of Izuku, he stayed. Scarred hands quickly wrapped around the teacup and Midoriya closed his eyes at the sensation. He opened them when he felt a patting sensation on his head. Kurogiri's hand was ruffling his hair while the man spoke. "I can stay up with you, Midoriya, if you'd like." "I'd like that very much, Kurogiri." The rest of the night was rather silent. There was the sound of Kurogiri walking back and forth, the clinking of glasses, the sound of Midoriya putting the teacup down, and the sound of twice snoring. At one point Kurogiri spotted Midoriya staring dead ahead. The boy didn't seem to be present, as he didn't seem to notice him at all. It was concerning to see that blank face. To see those eyes that looked like they had seen things a child should never see. Just what has Midoriya seen? What was it that made the boy seem as if a weight was dragging him down? Kurogiri eyed the now empty teacup in Midoriya's hands. Hands that held the teacup like it was precious, hands that were strong enough to trap Dabi, hands quick enough to catch a knife, hands of a boy who seemed so tired. "Do you think I'll be a good hero, Kurogiri?" Midoriya suddenly asked. The answer itself, Kurogiri though, should be obvious. Midoriya already had the makings of a great hero. Why was he asking such a thing? There's a lot of reasons I could come up with. There's a lot of reasons that society wouldn't want someone like me to be a hero. Lots of reasons as to how I won't be a good hero. So what do you think, Kurogiri? Do you think I'll be a good hero? Kurogiri felt something inside him shift uncomfortably at Midoriya's words. Something that made him think of clouds and rooftops. He thought of Midoriya's actions at USJ and the incident with Stain. "I believe, Kurogiri," said, catching Midoriya's eyes, "that you will help people to the best of your ability." Apparently, it looked like Kurogiri's answer was the right one as Midoriya smiled at him. In a broken voice the boy said, "That's all I ever wanted to do." The next morning, the members of the LOV, other than Kurogiri who didn't sleep, woke up to see Midoriya lying on the floor right next to the couch. "Hey princess, the couch is literally right there," Dabi said, standing over the boy and pointing at the couch. "Oh, it is?" Midoriya asked. "I didn't notice." Spinner laughed at the blank face Midoriya sent towards Dabi. "Why are you on the floor, Midoriya?" Spinner asked. "I'm thinking about stuff. The past. The future. What I have to do. What others will make me do. What I want to do, but most likely won't get to do. You know, just stuff." Midoriya shrugged while he laid on the floor. "Sounds fed up," Dabi said. "It is. But that's just how it is, I'm used to this." Midoriya said. Magna stepped over to Midoriya with her giant magnet that could be the size of a shorter person. She used her quirk to pull Midoriya up from the floor. He seemed surprised but not at all upset by the sudden movement or how Magna seemed to catch him under his armpits. "Oh, that's so cool," was all he said as he hung a few inches off the ground. Magna smiled. "Thanks," she said before setting him to sit on the couch and walking away. Compress laughed when he heard Midoriya mutter, "She's so strong." That day everyone ate much later than planned. Midoriya drank black tea which Toga had twisted her face in disgust when he offered for her to taste. Blood tastes so much better, Izuku-kun. Really? It's the best. Huh, Midoriya said, well, to each their own I guess. But I think Kurogiri's tea is better than any blood. Although who knows, maybe if you put some blood in the tea it will taste good. Midoriya didn't notice how everyone paused at what he had just suggested. Toga whipped her head to Kurogiri, who was already sighing at what he would end up doing. Kurogiri waved off the apologetic look Midoriya sent him. As the day progressed, Izuku became more and more aware of an important fact. Shigaraki, he called out. Yeah. I have school tomorrow. Shigaraki looked at him dumbly. Izuku continued, I have to go back home, gotta go to school and all that. Shigaraki continued to not say anything and Izuku saw that the others were simply silent. Izuku sighed. I can't give you any information to use, you already know that. I don't even know where the bar is, so you don't have to worry about me telling the heroes or whatever. No one even knows that you guys took me. And I don't particularly feel like telling them. That means you can stay, Izuku-kun. Izuku shook his head. No, Toga, I can't. Why not? Just can't, responsibilities and all that. Gotta go to UA to be a hero, blah blah blah, etc. etc. Spinner snickered. You don't seem too excited there, Midoriya. Izuku sent a deadpan look at Spinner. Should I be jumping up and screaming in joy? Yes. Twice yelled. No. Shigaraki said quickly. Izuku smiled, shrugged, and bent his knees as if preparing to jump. Sorry, but I'm getting missed signals here. Midoriya, please refrain from screaming, Kurogiri said from behind the bar. You got it, Tea Master, Izuku said. Tea Master? Shigaraki asked. What? Kurogiri needs a name fitting for his skills in making good tea. Anyways, we're getting off track here, Izuku said. We'll let you go later tonight, Midoriya, Shigaraki said. We will. Dabi asked. Yeah. Kid won't give us the information we need and it'll be too much trouble if the heroes come looking for him. Izuku pouted, and here I was, thinking I was being kept for my good looks and charms. Good looks? Dabi snorted. Kid, you look like you'll drop dead. Hey! Toga yelled, running up to hug Izuku. Izuku is really pretty. Izuku smiled and put his arm around Toga. Yeah, Dabi, I'm pretty. He looked at Compress and Magna. You guys think I'm pretty, don't you? Sure. Quite a beauty, I must say. Izuku smiled when Spinner started to laugh. But it was a smile that didn't stay for long. Going back to UA meant to go back to putting up a smile. To pretending that he wasn't a second away from falling to the floor and just closing his eyes and keeping them closed. It meant back to seeing red eyes glare at him and hearing those DMN explosions. It meant that he'd probably break another bone during training, as All Might had yet to find out how to help him. Izuku questioned if the man had even listened to him. But it's what he had to do. He wanted to be a hero, he wanted to help people. But did it feel good to not have to force a smile for the past few days? Despite how sure Shigaraki had sounded about what they were going to do, he was unsure. It would be troublesome if Midoriya stayed, there was no real reason really to keep him there. But there was a small part of his brain telling him to make the green-haired boy stay. But he couldn't do that. The kid would be warped back home and he would do what he needed to do to become a hero. Although, from the look of it, Midoriya didn't seem excited about what it entailed. Just another question surrounding Midoriya. Shigaraki looked at the kid who was sitting with Magna and Compress. The magician was showing him a magic trick. He wondered if he'd ever be able to answer those questions. It was at 9:30 p.m. when Kurogiri finally opened a warp to Midoriya's home. The boy didn't seem too troubled that they knew his address. Well, Midoriya said, looking at them while standing in front of the purple mist holding his grocery bag with one can of soup and his notebook, this was fun. 10 out of 10 kidnapping would recommend. Seriously? Dabi asked with a raised eyebrow. The tea was top tier and you were quite comfortable for sleeping on, including you, Midoriya said, also looking at Shigaraki. Spinner snickered. How are you not dead? Midoriya shrugged. I ask myself the same thing. Now before I leave, I have this, He took out a piece of paper and held it out for Toga to take. "It's for you, I hope you like it." Toga smiled when she grabbed the paper, and hugged him. "Thank you, Izuku." Midoriya hugged her back before letting her go, and Toga ran to Magna to show her the drawing. They saw as Midoriya looked at each of them with those green eyes. They still looked dull and tired, but there seemed to be a bit of light in them than compared to before, albeit small. When Midoriya stepped through the warp, they could have sworn the light disappeared. It's funny how one step into a place can make you feel like you're drowning. There was no relief or lightness on Izuku's shoulders when he stepped out in front of his front door. Instead, he felt an old familiar weight settle back into its home in his chest and lungs that made drawing each breath a task. Or at least that's what it should be, but never once did Izuku feel welcome there. Instead, he was ignored, criticized, scrutinized, and neglected. Inko Midoriya was a concoction of contradictions and hypocrisies. She'd go from treating him as a roommate to a child that needed their every move recorded. Inko would never give him affection, then expect Izuku to respond sweetly to her and to not cause trouble for his poor mother. He wasn't allowed to miss a phone call from her, while his calls always went to voicemail. She used to complain about the parent-teacher conferences that she never attended. What a loving mother indeed. Izuku doubted whether or not he'd ever truly find out what that felt like. For now, he heated up the other can of soup and tried to prepare himself for school the next day in silence that was deafening. It was amusing to walk down the halls of UA after having spent the weekend in company of villains. Especially two villains that had attacked the very institution of education he attended. Izuku couldn't exactly bring himself to care. Instead, he was trying his best to collect enough energy to open the unnecessarily large door of Class 1A. Why the diamond door needed to be so large, Izuku had to think about the answer for a moment. Wait, there's a possibility that past or future UA students may not fit through a normal-size door. Quirks, mutations, and simply people who were bigger than others existed, after all. Izuku sighed. So yeah, maybe it made sense, but still, Izuku was small and didn't enjoy the fact that the door could be so overbearing. Sue him. He was glaring at the door when he noticed his homeroom teacher appear next to him. Not bothering to look at the man and still glaring at the door, Izuku spoke. "I know it's logical for the door to be so big, sensei, but sometimes I just wish it was smaller." Izuku looked to the side to see his teacher looking at him. He heard the man sigh. "I'm glad to see one of my students shares the same thought as I do. But for now, let's go inside. Class will start soon." Green eyes returned to the door and Izuku took a deep breath as if preparing for a fight. "All right, Aizawa-sensei," he said before he finally pushed open the door. Shoyuta had thought that Midoriya was one of his students he'd have to keep a closer eye on since the beginning. He had been correct. But what he hadn't expected was for his student to be still standing outside of the class door minutes before the bell, and looking dead on his feet. He had known that Midoriya didn't particularly get sleep or a decent amount of sleep, but the appearance of Midoriya made him feel concerned. The teen looked too similar to how Shoyuta saw himself sometimes. Then Midoriya, without even looking at him, noticed he was there and posed an odd question. First off, no one really was able to be aware of Shuta's presence so easily. Second, no one ever said the size of the doors was logical. They seemed to forget the possibilities of students or teachers with a bigger than usual stature. Then there was Midoriya, glaring at the door. Acknowledging the intelligence in the design, but wishing, like Shoyuta usually did, that it was smaller. When Shoyuta told his student that they should get inside, he saw Midoriya take a deep breath, as if the task of going inside to see his classmates was as exhausting as it was for him. But what was most perplexing was seeing how, as the door opened, a smile suddenly appeared on Midoriya's face. How the exhaustion Shoyuta was sure he had seen was suddenly not visible anymore. In less than a second, his student completely changed. It was only until Aizawa let his class know that they had a week until their final exams that he saw some of Midoriya's exhaustion peek through. Izuku could feel aches in his hand when he heard about the final exams. The actual tests on paper he wasn't very concerned about. But the practical, that he was worried about. Even when some upperclassmen told them it would be against robots and several of his classmates looked relieved, Izuku did not. That was during a typical year. They have not had a typical year. Izuku suspected that Nedzu had something special in store for this year's final exams. Something twisted in his gut, anxiety clawed up his throat, making him lose his appetite. He ignored the concerned looks coming from Ida and Uraraka. But eventually those looks started to feel like too much and Izuku left the cafeteria. He made his way back to an empty classroom and let out a sigh of relief. Izuku sat down at his desk and put his head down. With the other hand he reached into his pocket and touched the familiar small object he brought to school. When he pulled it out he was pleased to see light from the window making the marble shine its beautiful blue. He smiled at the memory of Compress, gifting it to him. Izuku stared at the marble and rolled it around on his desk until his classmates returned. Aoyama had smiled and complimented him on having something that shined in his possession. But when the others came in and Izuku saw familiar red eyes, he quickly put the marble away. He made sure to keep quiet and his head down until their next class started. He flinched at the booming voice All Might had when he entered their room and announced they would be doing some activities in one of the training grounds. The weight in his chest felt even heavier than before. Izuku got dressed into his hero costume a lot slower than usual. Several worried glances were sent his way. As the students waited for All Might, as the man was somehow always late for his own class exercises, Izuku leaned against Shoji. The masked boy put one of his many hands on Izuku's shoulder. "Are you all right, Midoriya?" Shoji asked, with clear worry in his voice. He could see how Midoriya's face was unusually white and how he seemed to still be swaying. Shoji made sure to pull Midoriya closer to his side. Izuku let out a shaky breath and leaned his head against Shoji. The masked boy was strong, and Izuku focused on the sensation of Shoji's grip on him. "I'll be fine, but can I just stay here like this for a bit?" he asked. Izuku felt a reassuring squeeze on his shoulder. "Yeah, Midoriya, you can stay here. I don't mind." "Thank you, Shoji." Izuku stayed leaning against Shoji when All Might arrived and explained to them what their exercise would be. Sparring matches again. Quirk use, as usual, was allowed. And once again, like some big cosmic joke, Izuku's sparring partner for class was Bakugo. When that was announced, several worried looks were sent towards Izuku and Shoji seemed to pull Izuku a little closer. Everyone was taking turns fighting for 5 minutes. The class stood off to the side of a fighting area outlined by white paint, much like the one-on-one matches in the sports festival. Izuku sighed at how the setup left little room for improvement for his classmates. It seemed All Might had yet to take the variety of quirks and fighting styles in Class 1A into consideration. After each match, the twisting in Izuku's gut only got worse and he stayed leaning against Shoji. When it was Shoji's turn to go fight, the boy had practically carried Izuku and gave him to Tokoyami. Tokoyami looked surprised for only a moment before nodding at Shoji. Dark Shadow came out and burrowed under Izuku's left arm and Tokoyami supported him on the right. When Shoji returned, Tokoyami made no move to give Izuku back. The two of them simply stood at Izuku's side. But soon enough, All Might was calling both Bakugo and Midoriya to the ring. Shoji and Tokoyami shared worried looks while Dark Shadow was hesitant to let Izuku go. When Midoriya was at the outskirts of the ring, he heard Siro say something. "All Might, Midoriya doesn't look so good. I think he should sit this out." Murmurs of agreement were heard from the rest of his classmates, but they were all drowned out by All Might's laugh. "Do not worry. Midoriya is perfectly capable and it would be cruel to exclude him from the activity as it would also impede young Bakugo. The match will continue as planned." Each of All Might's words made the weight in Izuku's chest settle just a little bit deeper. And he had to scream at his feet in his mind to take the final steps into the ring and in front of Bakugo. Izuku let out a ragged breath when he lifted his head to look Bakugo in the face. Even though Izuku knew he was probably looking sick at the moment, Bakugo just sneered at him and said, "You're dead, Deku." Before Izuku was even given the chance to attempt to take another breath, All Might yelled, "Begin." The only way Class 1A could describe Midoriya's match with Bakugo was with one word: disturbing. They had all seen how unwell Midoriya had looked back since the start of All Might's class. They had seen how Midoriya had gotten dressed slowly and didn't seem fully there. They had seen the way he had leaned against Shoji and Tokoyami for support. Midoriya looked like he was going to pass out or throw up at any second. When Midoriya walked up to the ring, they couldn't keep quiet. Zero had called out to All Might, telling him that Midoriya didn't look well and shouldn't fight today. Everyone had seemed relieved when Zero said this, and they agreed. They were sure that now that All Might had been told, that the man would make sure that Midoriya went to Recovery Girl. But instead, the hero laughed. He reassured them that Midoriya was fine and that the match would continue. Midoriya meanwhile said nothing and walked into the ring. He still didn't look all there, but surely All Might would know best. Right? They had noticed how All Might was somehow close to Midoriya. So wasn't it possible that Midoriya was all right? Wouldn't All Might know if Midoriya needed to rest or get help? These were the thoughts that ran through their minds until All Might yelled, "Begin." Then they came to the conclusion that All Might was wrong. Bakugo had started the fight with a bang and a scream of the word, "Die," and they saw Midoriya barely miss getting hit with the brunt of it. Bakugo was relentless, not giving Midoriya even time to breathe without letting off an explosion. Now usually Midoriya would have been able to keep up, but something was wrong with their favorite green-haired freckled classmate. The Midoriya in the ring was unsteady on his feet and they could hear his ragged breathing. The Midoriya in front of them kept running from Bakugo, and even then, they didn't see too much of green lightning. Why wasn't Midoriya using his quirk? All Might seemed to have had the same thought as he yelled for Midoriya to use his quirk. The man seemingly unaware of the clear distress his student was in. "All Might, don't you think you should end the match? There's something obviously wrong with Midoriya. He's not okay." All eyes turned to Mineta, who had been the one to speak. They could see clear concern in the short boy's eyes. "Not fine?" All Might asked, obviously sounding like he didn't believe what Mineta had said. "You should not make excuses for your fellow classmates, I dash. They, are you looking down on me, you piece of shit?" Everyone turned around at Bakugo's yell and a few of them gasped in horror when they realized what they were looking at. Bakugo was clutching the front of Midoriya's hero costume. The other hand was already in the position to let off another explosion concerningly close to Midoriya. And Midoriya, oh Midoriya. They took in the details of their classmate. He seemed to be hanging limply in Bakugo's grip. They could see smoke coming from singed pieces of his uniform. The boy's head hung down to his chest and they saw blood drip onto the floor below. His ragged breaths sounded worse than before. "Oh my God! Midoriya!" Bakugo let go of him. Kaminari yelled, running up to the two boys. Bakugo turned towards Kaminari with his face screwed up in anger. "Ichich? What the hell did you say to me, dunce face?" Before Kaminari could respond, All Might told Bakugo that the match was over, with him winning. "What about Midoriya?" Uraraka asked when All Might didn't say anything regarding the boy. "You and young Kaminari can take him to Recovery Girl and then return back with him. I wish to give Midoriya some criticisms regarding his match." All Might said calmly before calling for the next two students up for their match. Uraraka didn't waste time making her way towards Kaminari, who now was trying to support Midoriya's weight as the boy seemed to be unable to carry himself. "Thank you, Uraraka," Kaminari said when she used her quirk to lighten Midoriya's weight. And she walked beside Kaminari as the boy carried Midoriya. "Let's get him to Recovery Girl." Izuku couldn't think straight with all the explosions Bakugo was creating, much less come up with an effective counterattack when he couldn't breathe. His mind was muddled and Bakugo's hero costume kept turning into the black Gakurin from middle school. Funnily enough, the look in Bakugo's eye was the same. It left Izuku wanting to not move an inch and to flee at the same time. For more than a few times during the fight, he forgot that he had won for all. There were moments where he was so caught up in Bakugo wearing that black uniform that he didn't use his quirk to move. Izuku just wanted for the explosions to stop. He wanted to stop tasting blood. He just wanted to be able to breathe. But Bakugo wouldn't let him. At some point, Izuku couldn't care less when, as long as the explosions stopped, Bakugo grabbed him and held him up. Izuku's head sagged forward and he couldn't bring himself to look up at those dead red eyes. He'd do anything to not have to look at the hate in those eyes. "Baby, are you looking down on me, you piece of shit?" He had no energy left to even address the absolute bullshit coming out of Bakugo's mouth. He was putting all that energy into trying to breathe. Why was it so hard to just breathe? His ears were still ringing, but he could have sworn that someone yelled at Bakugo. He wondered who. His question was answered when he felt a slight tingle from another pair of hands. Kaminari. Midoriya, are you okay? Wait, that's a dumb question, you're clearly not. Don't worry, I got you. It was at those words that Izuku stopped trying to hold himself up. He let himself sag into Kaminari's hold. He wanted to laugh when he heard the small oof that came out of the boy. Instead, he coughed. A few moments later, he found himself feeling weightless and carried in Kaminari's arms. Izuku let himself close his eyes as he knew that Uraraka and Kaminari were there. They wouldn't let something bad happen to him like this. They were strong. They were kind. I'm going to electrocute Bakugo until he passes out next time I see him, Kaminari hissed, tightening his grip on Midoriya. And I'll gladly help, right after I break his nose, Uraraka said, cracking her knuckles as she walked beside the blonde. Kaminari nodded. And then you'll help me with all might? Absolutely. Kaminari and Uraraka wasted no pleasantries going to Recovery Girl. The woman barely had time to yell at them for kicking the door open before Uraraka told her what happened and why Midoriya was there. So he overdid it again, didn't he? I thought I told Midoriya dash. Uraraka's fists clenched together as she spoke. Midoriya didn't do anything. This was all Bakugo with his quirk. Midoriya was already not well, but All Might made him fight and Bakugo went crazy. Now Midoriya's hurt and it isn't because of any broken bones. Recovery Girl simply frowned and SCKD at her teeth. She directed Kaminari to lay Midoriya on one of the beds in the corner. When Uraraka deactivated her quirk, Kaminari was able to lay Izuku out on the bed. He made sure to sweep Midoriya's hair out of his face and tried to make him open his eyes. When Kaminari finally saw green eyes, he smiled. Hey Midoriya, you're going to fine, okay? You'll be healed up in no time. Uraraka is going to stay with you while I get Aizawa-sensei. Kaminari said this in a calm voice while patting one of Midoriya's hands, letting him know that he was there because Midoriya seemed to be out of it. He watched as green eyes slowly from looking at his face to where Uraraka was. He made sure that Uraraka had her hand on Midoriya's when he moved. I'm going to go get Aizawa-sensei and come back as quick as I can. Do not leave Midoriya alone, all right? You got it, Kaminari. With that, Kaminari left, searching for the one teacher that was actually competent. Shoyuta was attempting to grade papers when he heard a commotion at the door of the teacher's lounge. He got up from the couch and walked over to see Cementos talking to what looked like a very set-off Kaminari. Rent aloud here. Now if this isn't important, you can as dash. Isn't important? He's in the infirmary, so I need to get Aizawa-sensei right now, or I swear to. Go dash. Kaminari, Shoyuta said and was pleased to see that instantly Kaminari's gold eyes met his. What is it, who's in the infirmary, and why do you need me? Cementos moved to let Shoyuta take his place at the entrance of the lounge and in front of Kaminari. The look on the boy's face was unlike what he had seen before. Usually, there was a sly smile and eyes that never stayed looking in one spot for too long. But that was not the student he had in front of him now. No, now Kaminari's eyes stared right back into his own with no sense of nervousness or fear. Midoriya's in Recovery Girl's office and it's not his fault. I can tell you on the way or in the office where Uraraka can back me up, but we have to go now, sensei, Kaminari said, with no fanfare, no dancing around the topic. This was straight to the point, blunt. Shoyuta listened. He wasted no time in asking more questions and started walking to the infirmary. Kaminari was at his side silent as he hadn't asked for the boy to explain. Shoyuta wanted to hear what both Kaminari and Uraraka had to say. He'd also like to hear what Midoriya would have to say as well. So he'd wait until he was in the infirmary. For now, he moved. When they arrived at the infirmary, Shoyuta had not been expecting his other student, Uraraka, to be looking at Recovery Girl with such fury in her eyes. I'm not leaving until Aizawa-sensei is here. Recovery Girl tapped her cane against in what an obvious sign of annoyance and frustration. Now I can't have you around my patients and I still need to get All Me dash. All Might? It's his fault that Midoriya's here in the first place. Before the argument could go any further, Shoyuta made his presence known to the youthful heroine. Recovery girl, has Midoriya been healed yet? What were his injuries? He noted how Recovery girl didn't seem pleased to see him, but she answered anyway. He had some bruises, minor concussion, he bit the inside of his cheek, some mild burns, and smoke inhalation. The smoke inhalation has been taken care of and so have the burns. He didn't have quite enough energy to completely get rid of the bruises, so he'll be tender for a day and so will the inside of his cheek. He's had worse concussions so he'll be fine overall. Shoyuta catalogued all the information before responding. Thank you, now I'll be speaking to Kaminari and Uraraka in private. We'll be staying here though with Midoriya. Recovery girl scowled at the last part, but when Shoyuta said nothing else she huffed and walked away. Once she was gone, Shoyuta turned towards his two students who quickly led him towards Midoriya. When Midoriya came into sight, Shoyuta held back from hissing. The boy looked like he had stood right in front of various explosions. The name Bakugu instantly came to mind. He looked at Kaminari and Uraraka who had each taken a position on either side of the bed as if guarding Midoriya. Both of you explain. And explain they did. Uraraka explained how in lunch Midoriya didn't eat and left the cafeteria. Kaminari explained how Midoriya looked sick while the boys were getting dressed and how Midoriya actually spent most of All Might's class leaning against Shoji and Tokoyami. They explained how the problem child looked pale, unsteady on his legs, and seemed to have trouble breathing. Then they told him how All Might called Midoriya up for his match with Bakugu. Of course, it was Bakugu. The image his two students painted as they described how Midoriya walked up to her ring wasn't a pleasant one. He had a moment of pride when he heard one of his other students spoke up in concern until it was crushed by fury when he heard that All Might had dismissed his class's worries about Midoriya. Kaminari actually started to give off sparks when he told Shoyuta that, and the hero was forced to use his quirk to avoid an accident. He didn't make a comment though, his students had a right to be angry and it was clear that they were holding it in while in his presence. What happened in All Might's class should have never had happened. Midoriya should have been excluded and sent to Recovery Girl for showing signs that he was obviously not okay. His students should not have had to watch their classmate be pitted against Bakugu, a boy who didn't know the meaning of restraint and who held a particular amount of anger towards the green-haired boy. They should not have had to witness such a thing, especially since the number one hero was right there to stop it. And then he had the audacity to say a last-minute comment about me taking Midoriya to Recovery Girl and bring him right back so he could give Midoriya criticism on his match, Uraraka said. It was at hearing this that Shoyuta lost his grip on his restraint. He said what? It was impressive to see that neither Kaminari nor Uraraka cowered under what he knew was a terrifying gaze. They were silent as Shoyuta took out his phone to see where All Might exactly was. When he started walking away, both Uraraka and Kaminari followed. When Shoyuta opened the door leading to the hallway, it was to a surprised midnight. The woman barely had time to reply when Shoyuta had told her to go and watch over Midoriya and not leave him alone. After telling the rated R hero that, Shoyuta was on the move again with two of his students close behind. In less than a few minutes were Shoyuta, Kaminari, and Uraraka walking into Class 1A. They interrupted whatever jargon All Might was saying with serious faces and eyes that made the other students in their class flinch. Uraraka, Kaminari, where is young Midoriya? I thought I told you to bring high dash. All Might, you better explain what was the thinking behind your class today, Shoyuta said, interrupting the man and drawing attention to him. In the corner of his eye, as All Might floundered in confusion, Shoyuta saw Uraraka walk up to Bakugu's desk. Then after Bakugu said something, he watched as Uraraka Ochako, one of the kindest students in his class, punch Bakugu Katsuki right in the nose. And before Bakugu had a chance to even respond, Kaminari Denki started to electrocute Bakugu. Although, the boy probably didn't get to do it for as long as he wanted as Shoyuta shot out his capture weapon and used his quirk on him. The class went into an uproar that he silenced with a flash of his quirk. Funnily enough, the calmest of everyone other than himself was Kaminari and Uraraka. The two of them looking proud of themselves despite being wrapped up in his capture weapon. I will be taking Uraraka and Kaminari with me. All Might, I believe that Nedzu wishes to speak to you. And Present Mike should be here in just a moment for the next class. Shoyuta had said before walking out of class, dragging the fighting duo, as he now dubbed Uraraka and Kaminari, out. He noticed the glares the two sent to All Might as they were pulled away. Once the door of the classroom closed behind them, he released them from the capture weapon and started walking ahead. Only a moment later were they walking behind him. Uraraka, good form and execution. Kaminari, nice control with the electric output, was all Shoyuta said as the three of them made their way back to the infirmary. Anyone who saw three people walking briskly in the hallway with similar smiles on their faces moved off to the side in a hurry. Izuku found himself yet again in the smoky expanse. This time he seemed to be a little closer to the 8 lights. He didn't know why he was there again. Just moments ago, he could have sworn he had been looking at Kaminari, who was telling him he'd get healed and that Uraraka was there too. He didn't know how much he needed for someone to tell him that he was going to be okay until Kaminari did and even held his hand. He hadn't been as panicked when he closed his eyes. Now he was in the smoky expanse again. Again he heard the voices, but they were much clearer than last time and they sounded angrier as well. Is he an idiot? How could he J-dash? Poor Ninth, I could feel his panic from all the way here. He was safer with the League, for God's sake. The two that are with him are good, aren't they? Did you hear what they said? They said they were going to electric a dash. Izuku, can you hear me? Izuku turned to his side and right there was a woman. She looked like the woman who he had seen last time and her face was familiar. She smiled at him. He tried to tell her that he did hear her, but no voice came out. He tried to bring up a hand to wipe away the smoke, but nothing happened. He frowned in frustration and the woman must have seen that as she smiled sadly at him. Soon. That was the word he heard before he felt the same tugging sensation as he did before. When he opened his eyes, it was to the familiar ceiling of the infirmary. When he looked down he saw 3 people sitting by his bed. Uraraka, Kaminari, Aizawa-sensei. They had waited for him in the infirmary, they stayed with him. Why did they do that? But then Izuku remembered how they were. He remembered the comforting words from Kaminari, the freeing weightlessness from Uraraka, and the odd sense of safety Aizawa-sensei always made him feel. They were kind to him. They were strong. They seemed happy to see him open his eyes. It was so different from the indifference or annoyance in his mom's eyes when she looked at him in the morning as if she didn't care that he had even woken up that day. Their looks didn't make him feel like he shouldn't have woken up. Didn't make him feel like he was being pushed down. Their looks were nothing like that. Instead, they made him feel warm inside, a much nicer feeling compared to the weight that was always there. And as he heard both Kaminari and Uraraka worry over him, even mentioning punching Bakugo, he wanted to laugh. Except he couldn't. He knew he'd probably end up coughing if he laughed. So he did something different. Instead, he smiled. And this time, it wasn't fake. Shoyuta had come to the conclusion that Izuku Midoriya tried to hide things with a smile. Or simply kept up the image to stop others from getting involved. In a way, he was like Shoyuta. But instead of a smile, Shoyuta had a blank face. He knew how ingrained portraying a certain face to the outside world was. So he knew the implication of the smile that Midoriya was giving them at the moment. It was tired and a little bit sad. But it was the most real thing he had seen since standing with Midoriya that morning in front of the logically big door. Shoyuta was glad that he didn't make Uraraka or Kaminari leave the infirmary. Because from the look in Midoriya's eyes as the child looked at those two, a look of something that looked like wonder, let him know he made the right decision. And he knew he had made the right decision of himself staying because when Midoriya looked at him, the smile didn't go away and that look of wonder stayed. "Hey there, Midoriya," he said in a softer voice than usual. "How are you feeling? Recovery girl healed you a while ago." Despite the good news he told Midoriya, the boy stiffened in bed. He saw green eyes flit around the infirmary, looking for something. Was he looking for Recovery Girl? She wasn't in the infirmary anymore, having left to go do something somewhere else on campus. Shoyuta saw how Midoriya was less tense when he didn't find Recover Girl. "Hey dude, how are you feeling right now? Do you need water or something?" Kaminari asked, drawing Midoriya's attention to the boy. When Midoriya went to speak but a rasp came out, Shoyuta was impressed with the speed and grace that Kaminari had in getting up and serving his classmate water. Both Uraraka and Kaminari had been rather protective, and it seemed that they would remain that way for a while. After drinking some water, Midoriya finally responded. "I'm fine, just sore and tired." He looked down. "How bad was I hurt?" Shoyuta paused for a moment. Never had Midoriya asked about what injuries he sustained when he got hurt. Kaminari and Uraraka looked a little surprised at the question as well. So he made sure to answer, as to not make Midoriya uncomfortable with the silence. "You had a concussion, bruises, a cut inside your mouth, burns, and smoke inhalation," Shoyuta listed. "Oh, that makes sense. I think I bit the inside of my cheek when Bakugo got me in my head. And the smoke inhalation explains why I couldn't breathe." Midoriya let out a short, mirthless laugh. "It really wasn't fun not being able to breathe with his explosions coming after me." Shoyuta saw Uraraka and Kaminari send concerned looks at him while Midoriya still had his head down. He motioned for them to give him a moment alone with Midoriya, and he received nods in response before they went off to the side to give them some privacy. "Midoriya, I'm sorry." In less than a second, wide green eyes were staring at him. "Wait, sensei, why are you so dash?" Shoyuta cut off Midoriya before he could continue. "I'm sorry, Midoriya, you shouldn't have had this happen to you. Kaminari and Uraraka already told me how you weren't feeling well, but All Might still made you fight Bakugo. This isn't your fault. It's All Might's, you're not in trouble, and I don't plan on letting All Might give you criticism on a fight you should have never been a part of." "Really?" It was Shuta's turn to look at Midoriya with wide eyes. The voice that came from Midoriya was so small and the look on his face looked like hope. Why was that look on his student's face? Why did he seem so surprised? Why was there an uncomfortable twisting in his gut as he looked at his injured student? "Yes," Shuta responded, and the man watched as Midoriya practically sank into the infirmary bed and let out a shaky breath. The twisting in Shuta's gut worsened. Shoyuta stayed with Midoriya after he told Kaminari and Uraraka to go back to class. The two students didn't leave before giving Midoriya a hug and fussed more over him. The green-haired boy laughed when Kaminari kissed his forehead while he held the boy's face in his hands. "Uraraka and I'll take care of Bakugo if he does something again, so don't you worry your pretty green head," he said before walking away. Shoyuta saw the fighting duo, as he now dubbed them, share a fist bump before walking out the infirmary. He'd have to make sure to keep an eye on those two when he went back to class. "Did they really punch Bakugo?" Midoriya asked him. "Yes, and Kaminari electrocuted him for a few seconds." Aizawa saw the problem child smirk. "Nice. I know since Gunhead that Uraraka has a brutal punch and Kaminari has gotten better with his quirk. Can I ask you to not punish them?" The hero let out a huff of amusement. "I didn't plan to kid. This happened during All Might's class, so let's just say Bakugo needs to work on his defense against sudden attacks." "Sounds good to me." It was odd sharing a joke with Aizawa-sensei. The man had always had a serious demeanor and a tendency to focus on what was logical. But here he was, joking with Izuku. Izuku liked it. He liked how Aizawa-sensei wasn't looking at him in disdain or annoyance. The teacher had obviously been pulled away from something to see Midoriya in the infirmary, but not once had he mentioned it or complained. Instead, he asked Izuku how he was feeling and apologized to him. Izuku wasn't used to that. "Midoriya," his teacher said, and Izuku was yet again surprised to see concern in his teacher's eyes. "What was going on before the match? The other two told me you looked sick and were leaning against Shoji." Yes, that. Could Izuku just tell Aizawa-sensei that it was his anxiety getting so bad that he had an anxiety attack that made him feel like he was about to fall and throw up? Could he tell his teacher that it felt like he was going to pass out when he heard he was going to fight Bakugo and All Might said that the match would continue as planned? Could he tell him that he kept catching himself forgetting that he was at UA and thought that he was back in middle school, when he didn't have a quirk and didn't know how to fight back? Could he tell him that he had wished he was laying on the bar floor looking up at Dabi and Spinner instead of in class with All Might? Izuku looked at Aizawa-sensei's dark eyes that had dark circles underneath like his very own. The hero already looked so tired, he always looked like he was one missed drink coffee away from falling asleep. Could Izuku bring himself to put one more thing on Aizawa-sensei's plate? Was it worth it? Did it even matter anymore? Izuku has already dealt with these things on his own for so long, never having friends to tell them about his troubles. never confiding in teachers or adults he trusted, not that he ever trusted any adults before. Do you really want to know? That's what Midoriya asked instead. Yes, Midoriya, I really want to know, Aizawa-sensei said. You are my student and despite my appearance, I do care. I don't like how you ended up getting hurt. And I don't like how you were unwell and unable to get help. So yes, I care, and yes I want to know what was wrong so that it doesn't happen again. Izuku couldn't help that a small part of him believed his teacher's words. Because no one ever sounded like that, no one ever looked at him like that. Like they truly cared and wanted Izuku to tell them what was wrong. Like he wasn't a burden. Midoriya couldn't say anything for a moment and he tried to come up with the words of what he would say. But when he opened his mouth to speak, the infirmary door opened. His mouth snapped shut. Shoyuda wanted to scream at whoever had come in the infirmary, and when he saw who it was, he was sure that his quirk activated on its own. Because right when Midoriya opened his mouth, right when he saw the boy's eyes finally have some light in them, in walked All Might with Nezu and Recovery Girl. Midoriya's mouth snapped shut and the boy's face went blank. Green eyes once again dull, causing Shoyuda to clench his fists and glare at the new arrivals. But that glare quickly turned into wide eyes, as when All Might and the others came in, he was in his buffed form. So when Shuda's quirk activated, the man poofed into his smaller, more skeletal form. Right in front of Midoriya. When Shoyuda looked at Midoriya, he expected wide eyes and a million questions. But instead, he was met with a blank face, so much tension in Midoriya's body that he looked like he was frozen, and hands clenched into his ruined hero costume he still had on. Young Midoriya, you're finally awake. Recovery Girl told me you had fallen asleep, but now that you're awake I can discuss the match with you. All Might said, clearly not reading the atmosphere in the room. Certainly not noticing the quickening breathing rate of Midoriya. The elf was oblivious to everything as he walked up to Midoriya and went to put a hand on the boy's shoulder. He never was able to though, as Shoyuda shot out his capture scarf to wrap around the gaunt arm and pulled it away from his student. As All Might asked Shoyuda what was wrong, Shuda looked at Nezu. Nezu, what is the meaning of this? He gritted out. Midoriya here is already aware of All Might's smaller form, and he simply wanted to come by and see how Midoriya was faring after getting healed. Recovery Girl informed me of his injuries and All Might had come to my office after you so kindly told him I wanted to speak to him. Nezu chirped. Yes, I wanted to offer some criticism regarding young Midoriya's match. All Might said. The man flinched when Shuda's glare returned to him. You will do no such thing. Shoyuda turned to Midoriya with softer eyes. Midoriya, you can go get changed back into your uniform and return to class. I'll talk to All Might and the others. Also, switch seats with someone so you don't sit near Bakugo. Shoyuda would rather another student go with Midoriya, but calling one of them to come here would take too long and he wanted Midoriya to get out there as soon as possible. Both Recovery Girl and All Might tried to interject but Nezu cut them off. Yes, Midoriya, I think it's time to go back to class. I hope that you feel better later on and I apologize for what happened today. Nezu said with his perpetual smile. With that, Midoriya got out of bed and slowly made his way out of the infirmary. Shoyuda sent him a small nod when the boy looked back at him at the door. He noticed how Midoriya hadn't bothered to look at All Might once. The moment Midoriya was gone, Shoyuda returned his glare at All Might. The man was clearly taken aback. He saw Nezu clasp his paws together. Now, Nezu began, looking at everyone in present company, I believe we have something to discuss. When Midoriya walked in, Class 1A went silent. Well, as silent as it could be with Bakugo growling from behind his mouth taped shut. Also, as silent as it could be from the red-eyed boy attempting to get out of his desk. Which did not look like it would be happening anytime soon due to the fact that Mineta had used his quirk to fix the chair to the floor on all four legs. Then fixed Bakugo to the chair. It was actually quite surprising that the boy had so much energy even after Recovery Girl had come by to heal him, much to the displeasure of Kaminari and Uraraka. Oh Midoriya, Kaminari said, quick to break the tension in the air, come over here. Kirishima was going to move to go over to Bakugo to try to calm him down anyways. They saw as Green Eyes looked at the Kirishima's seat as Kirishima was indeed going to go sit in Midoriya's seat behind Bakugo in an attempt to stop the boy from damaging school property. Midoriya didn't say anything as he sat down behind Kaminari at Kirishima's desk. Instead, he had quickly put his head down and took out a blue marble. Kaminari felt disappointed that Midoriya was no longer smiling or seemed anywhere near as happy, or just not sad, as he looked in the infirmary when he left him. Just what happened since Uraraka and he left. While the other students of Class 1A did not know about the smile they missed, they could tell that something was wrong. Including the shadow-like creature that had helped Midoriya stand earlier that day. No one stopped Dark Shadow from making their way to Midoriya and resting their head in front of Izuku on the desk. Everyone watched as Midoriya stopped rolling the blue marble with his fingers and looked at Dark Shadow. Then Dark Shadow proceeded to burrow their head underneath Izuku's hand, the boy not resisting at all. A moment later, Midoriya started to run his hand along Dark Shadow's head. All the while, he had his own head resting on the desk. But the whole time he did this, not once did he smile. His eyes were still that dull green. In a bar, Shigaraki watched as Toga begged Kurogiri to make her a cup of tea so that she could try out the idea that Midoriya had suggested. Kurogiri was less than excited at the prospect of watching the girl pour blood into his tea and thus, into his precious teacups. Teacups that he'd prefer to be held by a green-haired freckled boy that looked so peaceful when he held them. That image was not something he wanted to be tainted by Toga, no matter how much she pleaded. If he was going to give her tea, she would simply have to drink it out of a shot glass. Kurogiri's teacups were only for Midoriya and Kurogiri himself. Magna took a seat next to Shigaraki and they both watched as Toga started to throw knives and try to stab Kurogiri. The whole time asking him to make her tea while Kurogiri avoided the blades. Twice was on the sidelines saying things along the lines of, "Please stop," and "Stab the misty man, stab." "How do you think the little guy is doing right now?" Magna asked. Shigaraki thought how the hero student should still be in school at the moment. How he was surrounded by heroes and students who were trying to be heroes. When they had let Midoriya go, had all seen the light in the boy's eye disappear. They had heard his less than enthusiastic reasons as to why he had to go. They remembered how Midoriya had panicked and tried to run when he ranted about Endeavor. They remembered how tired Midoriya was when he arrived and how he still looked tired when he left. An uncomfortable sensation settled upon Shigaraki and he felt the need to scratch his neck again. "I don't know. I hope he is doing well at UU," Compress said from his spot on the couch. "He had even let me show him my beautiful masks and was quite respectful, unlike you heathens." Mr. Compress's comment was ignored and an anxious silence settled upon them. "He's at UA, he should be fine, right?" Spinner asked, clearly not sounding sure. No one was able to give Spinner an answer. Everything about Midoriya had screamed, "Not fine." Everyone in the bar knew it. "Aizawa-san, could you please let go of my arm?" All Might asked, eyeing the capture weapon that Aizawa had yet to release. "But, so you could go and cause more damage to my student, all the while without even realizing it?" Aizawa said. "Damage? Midoriya was fine and I do dash." "Fine? Is a boy who looked like he was about to pass out fine? Is pitting him up against Bakugo, who you know always takes it too far with Midoriya fine?" The underground hero seethed. As All Might tried to ineffectively calm down Shoyuta, Recovery Girl turned to Nedzu. The mammal seemed to be completely fine watching the number one hero get yelled at by Shoyuta. Recovery Girl's scowl continued to deepen. "Aren't you going to do something?" "I don't see why I would," Nedzu said to the nurse. Both All Might and Recovery Girl looked at him with shocked looks. "But surely Aizawa is completely correct. And although I would not resort to yelling and a capture scarf, I feel that Aizawa is doing a good job of pointing out the issue here." "The issue being?" "Oh," Nedzu chirped, "Yagi-san's ineffectual teaching that has endangered the students of my school." Nedzu's smile did not disappear even as All Might coughed up blood and Aizawa pulled back his capture weapon in disgust. "All Might," Nedzu addressed the man, "I know that the Hero Commission wants to keep you here teaching at UA, but I will have to make some change in order to prevent incidents like this from happening again. I know it is important for you to teach, but you will have to agree to these changes in order for that to continue. Shoyuta was pleased to see that Nezu didn't let All Might speak when he told them the changes that would have to be made. Every time that All Might tried to interrupt was shut down with ease by the rat. There was some satisfaction in seeing the number 1 hero's face fall as he learned that he would be unable to teach his class without another certified hero teacher present. Shoyuta was going to make sure that he was the other teacher, that he was going to be the other teacher present during All Might's class. Aizawa decided to ask about what he saw earlier after Nezu finished explaining. Can you explain why my student is already aware that the number 1 hero does not always look like some muscle blow-up doll? Shoyuta didn't like how the hero seemed to squirm so much when asked a simple question. Clearly, there was more. Yes, well, you see, I met young Midoriya before UA after saving him from a villain attack, and he happened to be right there when I ran out of time. Alright, that made sense, but why does he still look guilty? It was quite a surprise to him too, but the boy was smart and was able to figure out when it was when I was injured. And when I showed him, he showed him. You showed a young teenager that you just met the injuries that cause you to have a time limit? Yagi looked at him with confused eyes. Yes, Aizawa-san, but don't worry, we were on a rooftop so there was no one else. Anyways, after I left the roof Shoyuta felt his eye twitch. The number 1 hero, All Might, told his student his most important weakness to a boy after a villain attack. Instead of taking Midoriya to a hospital, because there was no way that Midoriya had not gotten injured, someone ended up on a goddamn roof and Midoriya saw All Might poof into a blood-coughing skeleton. Midoriya, after possibly almost getting killed by a villain, was shown injuries sustained by the number 1 hero. And then from the sound of it, he was left on the roof by himself. All Might, Shoyuta said in a stone-cold voice that made the hero flinch, I am going to leave before I do something I regret. But know that I will have a long discussion with you and you will listen to what I have to say. Then Shoyuta left before he would possibly injure the number 1 hero. It was nice to see that when he returned to his class, it was still intact. Although, he did raise an eyebrow when he looked over at Bakugo. The boy was scowling but silent in his chair, and Shoyuta could see purple from the ball that were keeping Bakugo there. Along with the ball that made sure that the chair would not be moving from the floor anytime soon. Kirishima was in Midoriya's seat. Speaking of Midoriya, Shoyuta had seen the green head of hair resting on Kirishima's desk. He was glad that Midoriya was able to get a seat away from Bakugo. But it was concerning to see a blank face looking at Dark Shadow as Midoriya petted his head. When Aizawa looked over to see Tokoyami, the boy didn't look the least bothered by his quirk companion not with him. Seeing that it wasn't exactly an issue, Aizawa let them be. When his students were all leaving, he asked Midoriya to stay behind. He also ignored the fact that there were some students who stayed behind outside the door. Midoriya, I just wanted to let you know what you don't have to worry about All Might. He was scolded by Nezu and myself. And he won't be able to put you in any more situations like that, because there's going to always be another teacher around. When he's teaching and doing exercises. Shoyuta let out a sigh when he saw Green Eyes look at him with no reaction. It was frustrating to see the visible change from what happened in the infirmary. It looked like Midoriya had shut down when All Might and Recovery Girl arrived. Midoriya, you can tell me what you were going to say in the infirmary. I still want to know, I still care. It felt like something clenched in his chest as he saw those dull eyes look at him for only a few moments before defining to the window. It barely looked like the problem child was there anymore. Later, I'll tell you later. That's what his students said instead. He could do nothing but watch Midoriya leave. Because he knew that if he pushed any more, that there surely wouldn't be a later. Dark Shadow helped Izuku feel grounded. The warm and icky feeling that came with petting the creature's head made sure that he didn't forget that he was in his class with his classmates from 1A. It reminded him that he was at UA, not anywhere else, just UA. The feeling of Dark Shadow occasionally nuzzling his cheek kept his mind from drifting too far off into unpleasant thoughts. But when he had to leave, he felt a fog settle on his mind. Everything had just been too much, and he could feel that he was shutting down. That's why he told Aizawa, later, I'll tell you later, because he wasn't even sure if the words would come out if he wanted to. He wanted to tell Aizawa-sensei, Even if it was just a tiny thing, he wanted to tell him because Aizawa-sensei had asked. He had cared. He left the classroom and barely took notice that a few of his classmates waited for him. It was Shoji and Kaminari. They explained how Tokoyami and Uraraka wanted to be there but they couldn't stay. When he didn't say anything to them, Kaminari was quick to simply smile at Izuku and push him against Shoji. The masked boy easily brought his arm around Izuku and held him close. They walked to the station in silence. Although Kaminari made sure to talk about some different topics. The words helped Izuku stay focused that he was with two of his classmates. Shoji's arm made sure that he actually moved. The two of them didn't let Izuku slip completely into his own mind. But eventually, they had to part ways. When Shoji had to turn down a different road, he squeezed Izuku one more time before ruffling his hair. When Kaminari had to go, he kissed Izuku on the head again. This time, Kaminari laughed at how some static made Izuku's hair stand up, and he tried to put it back down. Izuku didn't see the sad smile Kaminari had when he had to leave. Then he was alone again. The heaviness that had been getting worse all day finally crashed down in him. He wished that he could have stayed longer with Shoji and Kaminari. But he couldn't. Instead, he made his way home and stepped inside a place that made it hard to breathe. He felt so tired and dragged himself to bed. He ignored his hunger and any assignment he could have been working on, only moving when he finally decided to change out of his uniform. Laying on his bed, he turned his head to look out the window. He watched as the sky changed colors and the light disappeared. It wasn't until he had been looking at a black sky for a few hours that he eventually fell asleep. But it was anything but restful. His dreams that night were painted in red. The next day of school, Izuku did not bother to plaster on a smile when he walked into class. He didn't have the energy for it. He missed how he slept so peacefully on Dabi. He didn't have nightmares when he slept on the flame user. But last night his dreams were painted red. Most of it came from red eyes looking down on him as he felt burns and a ringing in his ears. His vision would be blinded, and before he could catch his breath, there was yet another explosion. Suffice to say that Izuku did not get any rest. So there he was in class, doing just the bare minimum. It really was all he could do. He made sure to pay attention to the lectures, taking notes on what was being said so he could go over it later when he'd actually be able to process more information. Izuku hissed in pain when he felt his hands spasm after writing too fast and too much. As he rubbed his hands, he looked up and caught the eye of his teacher. Aizawa-sensei was looking at him but looked away. Izuku was reminded of how Aizawa-sensei had given him a small nod at the beginning of class when he saw that he was in Kirishima's seat. Kaminari had been insistent on him sitting there, and Kirishima had promised him that he was okay with it. It actually looked like Kirishima needed to talk to Bakugo about something, but Izuku didn't pay too much attention. He'd rather not involve himself more than necessary in what Bakugo does. It had never fared well for him in the past. It didn't take a detective to notice how Midoriya was so quiet. Which wasn't unusual, but there was a visible change in how he used to be. Because before the training incident, Izuku always had a nervous energy. He was always putting on a smile. But never was he so silent. Never did he look so blank in class. It was obvious that Izuku was struggling with something. They weren't sure what to do though, and the look in Izuku's eyes made them anxious. On Tuesday, Izuku hadn't said a word and he looked like he didn't sleep. No one bothered him that day. After that day, he seemed better but still distant. They saw that he kept to himself, not speaking. Although he did spend some time with those in the class that were quieter. It seemed that he needed more silent comfort, and Tokoyami, Shoji, Dark Shadow, Koda, and Ojiro seemed to fit that bill. But while they were worried, Class 1A had to focus on preparing for the final exam on Monday. They were trying to study as much as they could before the weekend. Yaoyorozu held a few study groups in the library. On one of the days, Sato joined along with Midoriya. Sato and Momo shared a smile when they heard Midoriya speak as he explained to them some of the topics they were going over in a soft voice. It was nice for them to hear his voice. He only spoke a little bit more, but only when he was explaining the material. Among his silence and demeanor, they noticed something else. The marble. Almost every day they had seen him take it out of his pocket and play with it. When he took it out, It was one of the only moments where they saw something in his eyes. Fondness, that's what Jiro had said it looked like when they had discussed it. "Hey, Midoriya, where did you get that marble?" Sato asked during lunch. Midoriya was sitting with him on Wednesday, Yayo, and Aoyama, all of them enjoying a larger than normal amount of food. Sato and Yaoyorozu due to their quirks, while Aoyama simply had an affinity for cheese. They were surprised by the sudden look on Midoriya's face. It seemed happy and sad at the same time. "It was a gift." Midoriya didn't elaborate any further. "Well, since it is something so precious, I insist that you have it close to your heart," Aoyama said with a flourish of his fork from across the table. "You should make it into a necklace. And you would not be likely to lose it, my lovely friend." "I don't know how to make jewelry," Midoriya said dumbly. Aoyama looked at him with amused eyes. "Have you forgotten who is with you? You have the ever-so-talented moi and the goddess Momo, who would surely not be bothered to provide any of the necessary materials. Isn't that right, my love?" Yaoyorozu blushed at the compliment but nodded and Sato laughed. "It sounds like a good idea, Midoriya, but don't do it if you don't want to, alright? I can reign in our sparkly friend," Sato said to Midoriya. "It's okay, Sato," Midoriya said, and brought a hand to his pocket. "I think I'd like to do that." The rest of the lunch was spent with Aoyama and Momo trying to come up with a good design for the necklace while Sato tried to remind them to actually eat. Midoriya watched the scene. It reminded him of Toga and Twice in the bar. It was after school on Thursday when Yaoyorozu presented Midoriya with the necklace. Aoyama took it upon themselves to secure the necklace around Midoriya's neck. "You look simply magnifique," Aoyama said after kissing both of Midoriya's cheeks and looking at his creation. It was Friday when Shoyuta noticed Midoriya playing with something around his neck. It was a necklace. He saw that it was the blue marble that he had seen the problem child mess around with. He wondered what significance it had. The past week has been concerning to say the least. Shoyuta could feel the tension building in his class since the exams were coming up. Most concerningly, of course, had been Midoriya, considering the incident on Monday. He had wanted to talk to Midoriya but hadn't had the chance. The boy had been distant all week and usually surrounded by others, so he couldn't broach the subject. There was also the case that Shoyuta himself was busy preparing for the exams himself. The fact also reminded him that he had yet to talk to All Might. After being busy, the number one hero seemed to be avoiding him. Like a coward, Shoyuta thought. Not wanting to address his class with anger, he focused on his students instead. "You have prepared the best you can. You all have improved since the beginning of this year, and now is the time to show that. Make sure to get some rest on the weekend and come on Monday ready for your exam," Shoyuta said before dismissing his class. As he watched his students leave, he decided to make another effort in talking to Midoriya. He asked the boy to stay back for a few moments. Shoyuta eyed how Midoriya tensed slightly at the request, but once Midoriya actually looked at him for a few moments, he relaxed. Shoyuta wondered what that was about. Midoriya barely had time to stand in front of Shuta's desk awkwardly before Shoyuta asked his question. "Midoriya can now be later?" There was only a second of confusion before he saw that Midoriya knew what he was talking about. The kid's shoulders sagged down. "Yeah, I think it's all right," Midoriya said. Now wanting to keep Midoriya in an enclosed space and to relieve some of the tension that comes from an important conversation in a classroom, Shoyuta suggested something. "Let's take a walk." It was windy and it wasn't too hot outside. Shoyuta hoped that the change in scenery and the openness of the environment would help Midoriya feel less nervous. It wasn't until he was sure that no one else was near that Shoyuta spoke. "In the infirmary on Monday, what were you going to say?" Shoyuta thought back to how he had seen a look of hope in Midoriya's eye when he said that he cared, only for that look to disappear when the infirmary door had opened and his student had closed up, losing any progress he made. Shoyuta hoped that Midoriya would still be willing to speak to him now. So it was disheartening when Midoriya didn't respond. He sighed. "Midoriya, like I said on Monday, I care and I'll listen." He heard Midoriya take a deep breath before speaking. "Aizawa-sensei, there's a lot of stuff. And so much is hard to talk about, or I might not even be able to talk about." He paused. "I don't think I've ever actually talked about it." Shoyuta knew how hard it was to suddenly talk to someone about what they are struggling with. So he knew it wouldn't be easy for Midoriya to tell him everything, but he could start off small. Then how about just telling me about Monday? Why were you feeling so bad? He heard a snort. Anxiety and bad memories? Why does that sound like a question? I guess I'm a mysterious guy. Shoyuta sent him a deadpan look. Midoriya sighed, bringing up a hand to his necklace. But Shoyuta knew that it wasn't going to be easy for his student to suddenly tell him everything. He would have to wait and be patient. When Aizawa-sensei had asked Izuku to stay behind, Izuku had froze for a moment. He remembered how in the past his teachers asked him to stay back, only for them to scold him for something he hadn't done or to make snide remarks and make him feel worse than he already did. Also, he remembered how his classmates would like to wait for him afterward. His teachers never did anything despite Izuku getting hurt right after leaving their classroom. So when Aizawa-sensei asked him to stay, Izuku forgot for a moment where he was. Until he looked at Aizawa-sensei's face, a face that he never saw while in middle school. A face that, despite looking serious, held no ill will towards him, no disgust in his eyes. When Aizawa-sensei asked if they could talk and even suggested they walk outside, Izuku was able to relax slightly. Something he was never able to do with his past teachers. But still, it was not easy to talk. Even though he wanted to, it was hard to try to explain to Aizawa-sensei. Izuku didn't particularly want to open a whole can of worms, but he did want to explain. To just tell the man a little bit and finally let someone know. I was having a bad anxiety attack, I think, and the explosions didn't help. I don't do good with explosions, Izuku said in response to Aizawa-sensei's deadpan look. He wasn't wrong. But there was a lot he was leaving out, a lot that should be discussed. But not now. Izuku knew that his teacher was probably a little frustrated by his answer, but he didn't show it. Instead, his teacher showed understanding and said that if he wanted to talk more he could. He even suggested that next week they could talk about him talking to someone on a more professional level after their exams. That is, if you are okay with that, Midoriya. I don't want to push you to do something uncomfortable when you're not ready. Izuku had been quick to let him know that he appreciated the offer and that he would think about it. It warmed his heart that this teacher had thought of something like that for him. He left campus feeling a little lighter that day. Izuku was going over how Aizawa-sensei had been with him that he did not notice the extra pair of shoes at the door when he got home. When he heard noises coming from the kitchen, he momentarily entertained the idea that someone in the league showed up, since they knew where he lived. Maybe he could visit them for a few hours. It was Friday after all. He had a little bit more energy as he went towards the kitchen, wondering who it was. But he froze when it finally came into view. Oh, Izuku, you're finally home. There are some things I need you to do before you go to bed today. I had to come home early and am really busy. His mom. She was back. She was home. She was here. Izuku couldn't bring himself to move or to say anything at all, which only made Inko look up at him in aggravation. Are you listening to me? She snapped. Izuku forced himself to nod, his thoughts barely focused on the action. Instead, they were focused on the fact that she was back. That he would have to spend the weekend with her before an exam. A weekend with her after a week that had a horrible start. She was angry, it seemed, irritated probably at having to return earlier than she planned. Suddenly the stifling atmosphere in his home got 10 times worse. Izuku did his best to carry out the tasks that she gave to him in a hurry. God, what he wouldn't give for the home to feel the way it did when she was gone. Every one of his actions felt so much more difficult, as if there were weights tied to each of his limbs. His hands began to hurt more since she lowered the temperature. He never did tell her about the pain since he knew that she would say something along the lines of him being too troublesome. So for the rest of the night, as she kept her eyes on him, he suffered through the growing pain in his hands. When it was finally time to go to bed, he made sure to get away from his mom. Although not too quick that she would make a nasty remark about it. There was little relief though when he entered his room. Izuku could get rid of the sensation of her eyes on him, picking at him, making note of everything he was doing. Whenever she looked at him like that, he felt as if bugs were crawling all over him, and it would take one thing for her to decide to say something. To berate him and make him feel that other level of hurt that could come from just a few words. Even if she wasn't looking at him anymore and was in his room alone, he couldn't shake the feeling. couldn't relax enough to actually sleep. Laying on his bed, he put a hand around the necklace he had hidden under his shirt. He didn't want to risk Inko saying something, asking questions. Maybe even trying to take it away. The thought of that happening made him freeze. Please, not now, not when it was one of the things that made me feel better in this place that would never be home. He's already had so many things of his taken away from him throughout his life. His mother's love, his smile, being able to rest, an actual happy childhood, a semblance of mental stability. He didn't want something else to be taken away. Not if he could help it. Izuku was not surprised with how the weekend went. Which of course was bad. It was funny when Izuku compared it to the past weekend that he spent with the League. He should not have been wishing that he was in a bar full of people that were dangerous and could kill him in a vast number of ways than rather be in his home with his mom. But there he was, thinking that very thought. His mom did not let him go out, citing that she needed to keep an eye on him. Who knows what you were up to while I was gone? If he stayed in his room, she was checking up constantly. She'd look around as if searching for something to make a comment about. Which of course she was. She always waited for the opportunity to have a reason to yell at him, to demean him, to hurt him with her words because she didn't dare do so physically, not that she had to, plenty of other people did. Izuku didn't understand how things ended up like this. How she had started out so close and then so far away until she was a horrible combination of the two. At first, he could think that maybe she loved him like a distant relative, but he doubted that now. He had been doubting it for a while actually, he just tried to avoid thinking about it. Looking at his mother's gaze that held no warmth, no love, Izuku knew that she didn't really love him. He was simply a nuisance to her, someone that caused her trouble, someone who was never able to do anything right. It was not like he came to that conclusion by himself either. Inko had been very vocal in sharing her opinion over the years. Her words repeated inside of his head as he stared at the ceiling for the third night in a row. The fact that he would go to school the next day, finally get out of the house, away from her, provided little comfort. Izuku was already tired, but this only made it worse. When Izuku saw the sun start to come up and heard the bustle of noises being made in the kitchen by his mother, Izuku brought a hand over his eyes and let out a shaky breath. He was so tired. He returned to school on Monday, stomach churning, every bone seemingly grating. He was too aware of everything. The lack of sleep during the weekend dialed up all his senses to 7 even if he felt like he would be slow to react accordingly. Everyone was so anxious to truly pay him any mind, not that he minded. He didn't think he could handle holding up a conversation with any of his anxious classmates at the moment. He had enough anxiety to last him a lifetime, thank you very much. Izuku's hand barely left from its position over his necklace at the beginning of the day as everyone was doing last-minute preparation for the exam. Then finally it was time to take the written exam. He held his own hands in a tight grip when the teacher, who was not Aizawa since classes switched teachers on exam days due to protocol, handed out their tests. Izuku hadn't truly realized how much Aizawa-sensei's presence helped him calm down until the man was not there. Not that he could be angry at the hero, rules were rules. But he really wished he could just look up and meet the eyes of a man that seemed to show no expression but in actuality cared for his students. Instead, when he looked up, he met the face of a stranger. He quickly looked back down at the packet of questions on his desk. Taking a deep breath, he began answering them. The questions weren't hard and he didn't have any issue in answering them. Except as time passed he slowed down. He was just aware of too much. Izuku had to grit his teeth in an attempt to not scream while taking the test. The sounds of breathing, people erasing their mistakes, and the pencil scratching on paper made him tense and twitchy. His grip on his pencil grew tighter and he knew that the open response questions on his test would take a while to decipher. His hands were begging for some relief. The simple act of writing, which usually didn't pose too much pain, was making him grit his teeth due to the pain. For how long he had been in the cold of his own home, only to come here and write so much was not kind to his hands. It hurt. He paused mid-sentence when he thought about how he wished Dabi was there. But he wasn't. It wouldn't be smart for a villain to be at a hero school and Izuku shouldn't wish for one to suddenly show up. He felt just a tad bitter when he continued to answer questions. By the time it was time for the practical exam, that most likely was not going to be robots like the upperclassmen had told them, Izuku wanted to throw up. But he pushed that down as they were told how this part of the exams would go. This year it was a bit different. Along with Nezu wanting to prepare his students more and pressure from the commission, this part of the exam would be students against the teachers. A 2 versus 1 situation. So instead of just teachers, there were some people from the commission at UA as well. And instead of 2 students going with their assigned teacher, teachers were already at the place where the match could be and the students would be brought separately to that location. This was the Hero Commission's idea, and one of the agents had explained this was to make the situation as realistic as possible. More like anxiety-inducing as much as possible, Izuku thought. It really was. Everyone was on edge waiting in the room for the name to be called then taken somewhere else. Also, the order of the names called didn't matter, so you could not figure out who was your partner and opponent until you go to your location. The Hero Commission really was a bunch of sadistic bastards. Izuku hated it. When his name was finally called up, he felt uncomfortable that he didn't have his necklace with him. Instead, all his hand met with was the material of the hero costume he wore. And as he stepped onto the vehicle that would take him to his match, he tried to keep calm. He had to pass, he had to make sure he didn't mess up. If he did, it was only a matter of time that something else was taken away from him. That's how it has always been for him. Any goodwill Izuku had toward the universe, in general, was taken away the moment he stepped out of the vehicle. Because right in front of him was Bakugo Katsuki standing near the entrance of the fake city as they were told they fight All Might. Izuku ignored the glare Bakugo gave him when his legs gave out on him. All Might had been avoiding Aizawa since Monday. But did the hero feel any guilt or shame? No, he did not. Because in all honesty, he didn't truly understand why the man had been so upset with him. Yagi knew his successor, Midoriya, so he didn't agree with Aizawa's assessment that he had damaged the boy. Midoriya was the next holder of One for All. He couldn't be damaged by a simple sparring match. Speaking of the sparring match, Yagi really did wish to give Midoriya feedback. But accounts, All Might believed that his successor's performance should have been better. He needed to talk to Midoriya about training more with the quirk. If he remembered correctly, the boy had said something about needing assistance with the quirk. Yes, that should have been the reason. Yagi simply needed to teach him some more of his moves and have Midoriya practice them. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. With that thought in mind, All Might saw no issue in bypassing what he was told by both Nezu or Aizawa and went to speak to the agent from the Hero Commission. It pleased him to know that the man was happy in helping him change young Midoriya's match. All Might was sure that any issue between young Bakugo and Midoriya would be resolved once they were put together to fight him. They needed to work together in order to pass, and he knew that Midoriya was always determined to do his best in school. It really was killing 3 birds with one stone, he thought. Have Midoriya practice using OFA during the exam. Help the 2 boys work together and help with their relationship. See how much work Midoriya still needed with the quirk he had given him, maybe even talk to him after the match. He saw no issue with what he had done. After all, he was the #1 hero, he had defeated All for One, and he was young Midoriya's mentor. No one else would be able to make the correct decision regarding Midoriya. No one knew One for All like he did. And he had to make sure that young Midoriya would be able to use that power to become the next symbol of peace. That was the legacy he gave the young quirkless boy. That was the chance he had given him. Surely it was better than if Midoriya had never gotten a quirk after all. Yagi knew this because he himself had been quirkless. He knew how powerless he had been and how he hadn't been able to do much until Nana passed One for All down to him. Midoriya was sure to do the same when he found his successor. So All Might smiled and had no reservation when he heard the announcement that the match was about to begin. Izuku dug his nails into his hands to make himself calm down. He could not have an anxiety attack at that moment. Instead, he should be trying to figure out what the F he was going to do. He had barely gotten his breathing under control when the announcement for the start of the announcement was made. And off Bakugo went. Breathe in. Breathe out. Izuku ran after Bakugo because they really had to work together if they wanted to pass. Izuku had to pass. If he didn't, things could get worse. There was just a sinking feeling in his gut when he thought of the possibility of failing. He dug his nails into his palm again. Everything he had that was good seemed to be in the balance for some reason. Why. Breathe in. Breathe out. Izuku caught sight of his partner. The blonde had actually paused for a moment and Izuku walked up to him. Bakugo, we really need to come up with a plan to dash. Shut the F up, the plan is to beat All Might and pass. Izuku ground his teeth together. We can't just beat All Might, he's the #1 hero and dash. What the F, did I just say Deku? Bakugo said with those dead red eyes. When Izuku went to speak again, Bakugo turned around and started to walk away. Breathe in. Breathe out. Izuku needed to pass and Bakugo turning his back on him worsened that pit in his stomach he had been feeling. Damn it, why couldn't he just listen? If he could just listen. Izuku went after Bakugo, and he reached out a hand to stop him from going any further. Bakugo was about to leave the alleyway that they were in and therefore into the clear view of anyone if they were looking at the street. Bakugo just why dash, Izuku had begun to say while almost touching Bakugo's shoulder when suddenly there was a whirl of color and pain blooming on his jaw. He stumbled a bit but didn't fall. Bakugo hit him. What if ing surprise, Izuku thought. But he needed to pass so he pushed back the little voice telling him to run, stay quiet, be still, and he went to say something again. He tried to talk to Bakugo once more. Breathe in. Breathe out. Bakugo, I mean it. You can't just face All Might head on. We need to work together, and I'm sure that we could come up with a plan if you would just lead dash. Izuku saw as Bakugo stepped towards him with a weird look in his eye, but he continued speaking. That is until Bakugo reached out a hand and placed it on his shoulder. It made Izuku instantly freeze up and stop talking once he felt the familiar heat from that hand on him. The heat starting to increase. Deku, Bakugo practically snared at Izuku. I told you to shut the F up. Breathe in. Breath o dash. Izuku could smell smoke and hear the muffled pops of Bakugo's quirk against his shoulder. So, he stopped breathing. But the strain of not breathing was nothing compared to the pain that Izuku felt once Bakugo lifted his hand from his shoulder. It was nothing compared to the pain Izuku felt when he looked at Bakugo, and instead of seeing his testing partner in their hero costume, he saw Bakugo in the black Gakurin from middle school. Along with the familiar pain of Bakugo's quirk being used on him once again. Nezu felt his fur stand on end when he saw that there was an unauthorized change made regarding his students' exam matchups. He had agreed with Aizawa that under no circumstances was Midoriya to be paired with Bakugo during the final exams. Yet there he was, in the observation room searching for those two students who ended up being matched against All Might. It did not take an intelligence quirk to put the pieces together and come to the conclusion that the #1 hero had something to do with it. But that was not what he was focusing on at the moment. It was instead on the screen changing, trying to find live footage of the two test takers. Considering the size of the fake city and the number of cameras that were available, this took a while to do. And when they finally did find their two testers, questions and concern were the only things they had. Because while Bakugo Katsuki walked out into the street, seemingly unharmed, there in the alley lay Midoriya Izuku who looked like he had been attacked. But there was no sign of All Might nearby, and they had been too late in seeing what had happened. Of course, there was always the option to rewind the video, but that would have to wait considering that Bakugo was making his way towards All Might and Midoriya got up from the ground. The exam continued. He was back in middle school. The same red eyes are glaring at him, looking at him with hate that he was used to. Smoke filled his nose and the pops were deafening, even above the sound of his own beating heart he could hear in his head. Probably because Bakugo was letting off explosions dangerously close to his ears. Pain bloomed around his eyes and then in his cheek. The familiar taste of blood filled his mouth. He looked down and saw red dripping onto the ground. His vision blurred. The hero costume Bakugo was wearing kept looking like the back middle school uniform and the alleyway looked like the wall of the back of the school outside. He tried to push himself away from Bakugo. He got explosions in return and fell to the ground. Air escaped his lungs when he was kicked. He felt the phantom pressure of hands holding him down and all he wanted to do was curl up into a ball. He stayed silent as that was the way to make sure that the pain would stop as soon as possible. That's what he was used to doing. He'd like to think it made a difference. But he wasn't sure as he laid on the ground trying to catch his breath. He could feel liquid pooling in his mouth and he tried to keep it from going down his throat. It reminded him too much of the sludge villain and he spat out blood with a bit more force than necessary. He stayed still. It was a few moments until Midoriya was able to somewhat hear his surroundings better. He was relieved when he didn't see or hear Bakugo. He was alone in the alleyway. Not the first time that's happened, Izuku thought. It took some effort for Izuku to get himself off the ground. He took note of his various injuries and he just let himself breathe. Each breath made him wince, and he knew that his eyes were not supposed to hurt the way they did. But he ignored it. He knew he was still taking an exam and that meant that if he came across All Might, the man would try to attack him, seeing as he didn't hear a fight between Bakugo and All Might going on yet. He'd very much like to avoid that. So after checking his surroundings and just breathing, he used his quirk to hop his way up the two buildings that were on either side of the alley. He used the same moves that he had seen Gran Torino make. He grunted in pain when he reached the top and grabbed the ledge but didn't pull himself up. He eyed the skyline and caught view of the gaudy childish signs that showed the exit he needed to reach in order to pass. He made his way back down, grunting in pain when he hit the floor. He spat out more blood. Then he made his way towards a manhole, plan in mind. The plan was this: go through the sewers to the exit and avoid everyone, including Bakugo. Izuku was going to leave. It was that thought in mind that he lifted the manhole cover and went down below. He was pleased to note that there was a perfectly good walkway and that it was not completely dark. Then using his quirk, Izuku started to make his way towards where the exit was. Green lightning lit up his path. Shoyuta had just finished his own matchup with his two students and was making his way to the observation room. He wanted to see how his other students were doing and how Midoriya was doing as well. He wanted to see how Snipe was faring against his student. So imagine his surprise when he walked into the observation room to see footage of his student going the sewers while Snipe was also in the observation room. "What the hell?" he asked, looking at Snipe. "How is he there but you're here?" The masked gunslinger shrugged his shoulder in confusion. "I don't know. One minute I was waiting for your student to show up and the next someone was telling me that there was a last-minute change." Shoyuta felt anger building up at hearing that last-minute change. Apparently All Might took it into his own hands to make the change, a voice said, and Shoyuta turned around to see Principal Nedzu watching the screen with a smile that looked more like a frown. The rat continued, "All Might talked to one of the individuals from the Hero Commission and they made the change without alerting the proper individuals. I came in already to see Midoriya's match to have already started." "Who is his partner?" Shoyuta quickly asked. Nedzu's smile was clearly no longer a smile. "Bakugo Katsuki. And yes, before you ask, I did see if the match could be called off but was prevented by the Hero Commission representative here. They don't see why a match with two students of All Might's choosing to fight him should be called off." Shoyuta scowled and clenched his fists. Because if Nedzu had already tried to get the match called off and couldn't, well, that meant that it was serious. Shoyuta cursed when he saw the image of All Might flit on one of the screens, and he raised an eyebrow when he saw Bakugo slowly making his way to the hero. Meanwhile, Midoriya was in the sewers. There was a small number of cameras in the sewers, but he could see green lightning cross on a few screens. His student was making his way to the exit. Shoyuta hoped that Midoriya would make it there quickly. He didn't like the quick flashes he saw of his student looking injured. When Izuku started to hear the signs of a fight going on overhead, he didn't pause. If anything, he urged his legs to go faster despite the pain he felt across his body, pain not from his quirk. He knew that Bakugo had no chance against the hero. He ignored the surprisingly clear yells for him to come out and rescue his partner from All Might. He ignored the sounds of building collapsing as All Might destroyed them, like a villain would. Of course, there was the possibility of the ground above Izuku falling and crushing him. But considering how he was feeling, how he was so tired, how he wanted nothing but to sleep and be able to breathe without feeling like there was something missing in his chest or blood threatening to go down his throat, Izuku didn't hesitate to stay in the sewers. Possible death by collapse be damned. Did he even care if he died? In all honesty, to him, it would have been a thing a long time coming. Not a surprise at all. With all the stuff he has dealt with, Izuku was more surprised that he was alive at the moment. That he was in dark tunnels making his way towards where the exit should be, his partner and mentor be damned. He just wanted to leave and pass. And guess what? That's what he would do. He didn't have to face All Might if he didn't want to. He didn't. No words from his mentor would be enough to draw him out onto the surface. Izuku couldn't find it in himself to care if maybe he was disappointing the man who gave him a quirk. Izuku was already disappointed in himself, but even more so he was disappointed in All Might. Especially when he heard the man say something about how this match was an opportunity for him to grow and said that's why he made it that way. So this was Yagi's fault. It was his fault that Izuku got burned again. How typical. There was some anger among the exhaustion Izuku felt when he passed through the exit and heard the announcement that he had passed. He didn't bother to look back at All Might. The hero wasn't smiling. Not that Izuku cared anymore at the moment. All he cared about was making the pain stop. All Might was surprised when it was only Bakugo that had went after him. He had been sure that young Midoriya would be right here, ready to face him with his teammate. All the questions he asked Bakugo about the whereabouts of Midoriya were met with yells and various saying of, Deku, who gives if about him. So All Might focused on Bakugo. Once he got the boy in a good grip, unable to cause any more damage, he yelled out for Midoriya to come out and rescue his partner. He knew that young Midoriya would never leave behind a teammate. It wasn't heroic. But All Might's smile began to falter when he saw no sign of his successor. Surely young Midoriya would not have left behind young Bakugo, he thought. He even made sure to cause damage to other parts of the Make City to draw Midoriya out, but he didn't catch a glimpse of green anywhere. Just where had the boy gone? Young Midoriya, All Might yelled, his voice booming in the fake city. Are you simply going to leave your teammate? You need to work together if you are to beat me. No response. This is the opportunity to work with young Bakugo. I made it so you had the chance to work together and grow. He yelled because surely Midoriya would not just dismiss something his mentor had done. This was a chance for the boy to grow, and he could not do that if he simply left Bakugo behind. But when he heard the announcement, "You have passed," ring out into the fake city, he found that had been wrong. When he went near the exit, he was met with the sight of his successor walking out of the city, fists clenched, and not once did he look back. All Might couldn't fight the sensation that he had lost something much more important than a simple exam mash. Shoyuta didn't waste time heading to Recovery Girl when Midoriya's match ended. He had seen the live feed of Midoriya walking out of the exit gate looking less than okay. He didn't want his student to be alone. A twisting sensation in his gut made him walk faster. He arrived at his destination just in time to hear Recovery Girl muttering about reckless students and never listening to her. Once again anger flared up at what he was hearing, but before he could respond to Recovery Girl, a small voice said something. Just stop. Recovery Girl turned back to Midoriya, who was laying in a bed. What did you say? I can't hear you if you mutter and dash. Please stop, Midoriya whispered out a bit louder than before. I can't take it anymore. The sensation in Shuta's gut twisted something horrible when he heard the desperation and pain in his student's voice. I didn't do anything wrong, so why are you blaming me? All I do is try and try. I asked for help but didn't get any. You know how hard this is, but all you do is get mad at me. But I didn't do anything wrong. But it's me everyone is yelling at, getting mad at. What about him? Why is it okay for him to hurt me all the time? I just want it to stop, so please just stop. Midoriya was crying and trying to catch his breath. Every sob felt like a punch to Shuta's gut. Why did he sound like that? A child should never sound like that. Recovery Girl caught his eye and he beckoned her over. The woman actually looked a bit confused as to what to do with Midoriya openly sobbing near her. Once she was close enough, he simply said, "What were his injuries?" Recovery Girl listed them. He had second-degree burns, a black eye, a split lip, another cut inside his mouth, one cracked rib, a concussion, various bruises, and it was clear that the boy was suffering some sleep deprivation. That was what she told the underground hero. God did Shoyuta wish that he had hurt All Might when he had the chance last week. After a few minutes, when Midoriya's sobs died down, Shoyuta insisted that Recovery Girl heal him right away. One kiss later, his student was passed out and he was displeased to see the faint bruise around his student's eye still there along with a smaller cut still on the boy's lip. He didn't have enough energy to completely heal everything, Aizawa-san. This is all that I can do if I don't want to kill him, Recovery Girl had said when Shoyuta had glared at her. When Recovery Girl left, Shoyuta stayed in a seat by the bed where Midoriya was. It was a few hours later that Shoyuta saw that his student was awake. It was right after he had ran all might out of the infirmary when the buffoon had the audacity to take one step inside. One look from Shoyuta was all it took for the number one hero to freeze and retreat. Shoyuta muttered, "The All Might is not getting anywhere near my student," when he sat back down. When Shoyuta heard a small voice say, "Sensei," he practically got whiplash with how quickly he turned his head to look at his student. Tired, dull green eyes stared at him, and Shoyuta didn't say anything. He just brought a hand to rest near his student's hand on the bed in silent support. He made sure to listen when he saw that he was going to say something. "I'm so tired," Midoriya said in a way that his voice cracked. There was a heart-wrenching pain in that voice, and Shoyuta felt something clench in his chest. The feeling only worsened when he saw a tear slip out of the boy's bruised eye. Shoyuta moved his hand to rest on top of Midoriya's scarred one. He squeezed it when only more tears came out. The whole time his student was silent. Izuku had not been expecting his homeroom teacher to be there when he had woken up. Much less to hear the man cursing out the number one hero and talking about how he wouldn't let the man near him. It was nice. When those dark eyes had looked at him, Izuku finally said the one thing that seemed to perfectly describe how he felt. "I'm so tired." He was so tired. Izuku had been tired for so long, and this, it seemed, was the breaking point. He was tired of Bakugo, tired of explosions and being burned. He was tired of being put in situations that he didn't deserve. He was tired of Recovery Girl continuing to scold him for things that weren't his fault. For treating him as if he liked getting hurt and being sent to her. Liked being told that he needed to get better control of a quirk he had only had a small amount of time to learn to control. He was tired of how All Might was trying to make another copy of himself. How he ignored Izuku's hesitant suggestions to try something new and instead taught Izuku another move that he used. Izuku, of course, already knew the move, but he would have liked to create his own. He was tired of not being able to sleep in his own bed or even leave his own home. He was tired about the fact that it didn't even feel like home, that he didn't know what home was supposed to feel like. Izuku was tired of holding everything in, so he let go. He cried and he told Aizawa-sensei how he felt. The man seemed to understand on some sort of level because the next thing he knew, he felt human warmth wrap around his hand. A hand with crooked fingers and had been aching and in pain all day, all weekend. That simple gesture, that look in his teacher's eye made him feel like he could let go and be okay. So he let the tears fall, and he squeezed Aizawa-sensei's hand back until he fell asleep again. When Izuku woke up, he felt empty, and so was the seat that Aizawa-sensei had sat in. He could hear the man's voice on the phone in Recovery Girl's office. He felt numb and heavy. Izuku could already tell that he needed to go home or he would be somewhere else. It was like how he felt that last Monday, but worse. He didn't want to be in the infirmary anymore. Izuku wanted to leave. So he did. He slipped off of the bed, wincing at the injuries that clearly had not been able to be healed completely. He grabbed his bag that had been so politely set against this bed along with his uniform. And then he left. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't make a sound. It was like he was a ghost as he left UA campus. It was clear that school had ended a while ago. And like a ghost, he drifted back home. This time there were no classmates keeping him tethered, preventing him from drifting too deep inside his own mind. When he got home, his mom did not acknowledge him. He didn't acknowledge her. He mindlessly walked to the bathroom. He could feel the uncomfortable stretch of his skin and he thought about the burn cream he should have. When he opened the cabinet, he drifted further away as he saw there was none. He would have to go get some. So he did. Inko didn't say anything when he walked back out with only his wallet and phone after changing his clothes. How interesting how she went days watching his every move to suddenly ignoring him. That was the thought Izuku had when he walked to the convenience store. He thought of many other unpleasant things as he made his way to the aisle where there were medicines, bandages, and the burn cream he needed. Then he just stood there, staring at all the options. He was too deep inside his own thoughts to pick the med burn cream he went there for. Pathetic. In the middle of an empty aisle, There was a young boy with green hair that hung his head low and didn't move for several minutes. No one paid attention to him. No one paid attention to him when a scarred man with staples in his skin walked towards the boy. No one paid attention when the man said something to the boy but did not get any response. No one paid attention when the man ended up grabbing an array of different medical products that were in the boy's line of vision. And certainly, no one paid attention when the man gently grabbed the young boy's hand and pulled him into a swirling mass of purple mist that appeared out of nowhere. No one paid any attention at all. After all students completed the exams, it was only a couple of hours before they were given their results. Despite being morally questionable, the Hero Commission was effective. Class 1A let out a sigh of relief when it was revealed to them that even if they did not pass, that they would still be going to the summer training camp. Apparently, Aizawa-sensei had done another logical ruse. Although they found it odd that Present Mike was the one to let them know instead of their teacher. After being told this, they were allowed some free time. They quickly formed groups and started talking about how their exams went, but a certain question came up. "Hey, where is Midoriya and Aizawa-sensei?" Mina asked. "I heard that Midoriya got injured," Mineta said while sitting on Kaminari's desk. Kaminari looked up from his phone and poked Mineta. The boy jumping slightly at the contact. "Where did you hear that?" Mineta shrugged. "Sometimes teachers forget I'm there since I'm so short. I heard them say that he was in the infirmary and that Aizawa-sensei was there with him." "Really?" Shiro leaned further into his seat. "Do you think he was hurt badly?" Mineta frowned. "Well, if it wasn't that bad he would be back already, only a little tired considering Recovery Girl's quirk. But it's been a while, meaning that either his injuries were worse or he didn't have enough energy and passed out. Then there's the option that both of those things happened." "Mineta is right, Karo," Azui said as she had been listening. "DMN. I hope he's all right," Shiro said. Mineta and the others who were listening nodded in agreement. Despite their happiness at passing and at the plans to go shopping together as a class, there were concerned looks sent towards Midoriya's empty seat. Kaminari and Uraraka shared concerned looks with some of their classmates when they left campus. Because Aizawa-sensei and Izuku never returned to class. And he had not responded to any of their messages. Shoyuta let his head slump towards his chest when he saw the empty infirmary bed. His student was gone and so were their belongings that were set beside it. He had wanted to join Midoriya on his way home and let the kid's mother know what happened. He didn't want to let his student go home alone after experiencing what he did. Especially after he saw the footage of the exam. The look he had while he watched the video footage Nedzu sent him would be enough for people to keep away from him for a long time. And rightfully so. Shoyuta was furious. He hated seeing his student get attacked by Bakugo. The boys simply wanted to work together and Bakugo answered him with violence. He hated seeing Midoriya take hit after hit, never once fighting back. Why didn't he use his quirk, he wondered. Midoriya was strong and should have been able to fight back. But for some reason he didn't. It made him worried. Especially when he rewound the footage and saw how Midoriya froze at the contact on his shoulder, how his eyes didn't fully look present. Was he having a flashback? Was that why he didn't use his quirk? Questions on top of questions piled up in Shuta's mind. But the one person who could answer him was gone. He had to make sure that he would speak to Midoriya the next day when he is supposed to tell his class more about the trip they would be taking. He needed to talk to Midoriya. Despite only spending a weekend with the league and in all honesty just confusing them, they were still slightly concerned about the green-haired hero student. Many things that Midoriya said and did had left them feeling worried in a way. But they shouldn't have. They barely knew the boy and he was going to become someone that would be their enemy in the future. That did nothing to change the fact that their conversations tended to return back to the young hero. That there a sense of unease when they thought about Midoriya, like something bad was going to happen to him. After all, the boy himself had told them he was not okay. And it wasn't often that someone just told a bunch of villains that they weren't okay. "You know you could just kidnap him again if you're so worried and miss him," Dabi said when Toga once again lamented the fact that Izuku-kun wasn't there. "We are villains after all, there is literally nothing stopping you." "Really?" Either that or just visit him like a normal human being. The way Toga smiled wasn't necessarily normal, so Dabi knew which option she preferred. So with that in mind and persistent nagging from Toga, and no one saying no, the league had done something rather peculiar for the past week. Each day one of them hung around the convenience store where they last picked up Midoriya, waiting for the boy to show up. But during the whole week and weekend, they didn't catch a glimpse of green hair. It was Monday when Dabi asked if he really had to go. Yes, he might be there and I miss him, Toga said. Dabi looked over to the others who seemed to be waiting for him to leave. Are you all in agreement or something? Twice gave two distinct answers. He was all right, so I'm fine with him here again, Spinner said. It would be nice to see the little guy again, and he did say he would recommend being kidnapped. Remember the whole 10 out of 10. Magna said. Yes, Dabi did remember that. I find myself lacking proper entertainment, so I do hope you manage to get the young hero, Mr. Compress said while messing with a marble as usual. Shigaraki didn't look up from his game console. If it gets you all to shut up for 5 minutes. But everyone knew that Shigaraki in a way wanted the hero student back. Whenever the topic of the green boy came up, Shigaraki was quiet, but never did he tell them to stop mentioning him or say no to the idea of having Izuka back at the bar. That itself was answer enough for Dabi. Kurogiri didn't say anything as usual, but they could see how the wisps seemed to resemble that of when he made tea for the boy. Dabi himself could admit he wanted to see Midoriya again. The kid was odd, having spoken at ease with him, except for the panic situation, and even slept on him. He was funny and sincere, but there was a clear weight resting on him and making it hard to smile. Dabi couldn't deny that he was a little worried. Anyways, he was a villain, so kidnapping a kid again should be no big deal, never mind the reasoning behind it. So he went through Kurogiri's warp without saying another word, and he entered the convenience store. And waited. It was much later than he thought, almost like the first time when Dabi finally got a glimpse of green hair walking into the convenience store. The boy didn't look around, so he never saw Dabi. Midoriya was wearing a short-sleeve shirt rather than a hoodie like last time, and he walked slow. Dabi kept an eye on him as the boy made his way towards the aisle that held medical supplies. Why was he going to that aisle? From being able to see the tops of the aisle, he saw green hair pause, slump downward, and not move. Why wasn't the kid moving? It was after another 7 minutes that Dabi finally moved. To hell with waiting for Midoriya to walk out to get him again, he wanted to know why the kid was stuck still in the middle of a store for so damn long. So he walked, and when finally got to the aisle and looked down, he felt uneasy at the scene before him. Midoriya was standing in front of the shelf with his head hung low. Green hair covered the boy's eyes. Dabi wondered if they would have any light in them. He could see a bit of Midoriya's face. He was surprised to see what looked like a cut on the boy's lip. The kid's arms were at his side and his hands just hung there. Dabi could see what looked like new bruises on his arms along with scars that looked older than he felt comfortable thinking. He hadn't seen any of this last weekend. The boy had worn a hoodie and the sleeves were always down those few days. No one in the league had seen any of it. He thought back to how Midoriya had talked about being hurt by others before, being in worse situations. He wondered how many of those scars were from others. Dabi stood in the aisle long enough for anyone to notice him, but still, Midoriya had not looked up and made no sign that he had noticed Dabi's presence. So he walked forward. "Hey, princess," he called out, fully expecting that to at least garner a response. It didn't. There was no response when he got within a foot of the boy either. "Midoriya," he said more quietly, but loud enough that he should have been able to hear him. Still no response. It reminded him of how Midoriya had frozen after his Endeavor tirade, but it was different. There was no tension in the boy's body and he was breathing. Instead, it was like Midoriya had shut down. Dabi didn't know, but he didn't like it. He looked at the things on the shelf that Midoriya was standing in front of him. He looked back at Midoriya and frowned. Surely there was a reason that Midoriya was at the store in the aisle in front of bandages, pain medication, and burn cream. He sighed. "Well, let's do a little bit of shopping, shall we?" Then Dabi grabbed several products off the shelf and put them into his pockets. Still no response from Midoriya. The next thing he did was take out his phone and sent a text to Kurogiri, letting him know to open a warp in the store. He made sure to send the coordinates that the warp villain needed. Not a second later, a warp gate in the aisle that he and Midoriya were in appeared. Still no response. The unease Dabi felt grew greater. His resolve to bring Midoriya back to the bar was solidified. Even if they weren't already planning to essentially kidnap him again, there was no way Dabi would have left Midoriya in the store seeing the way he was at that moment. The thought of leaving him made him feel uncomfortable. It reminded him of when he was forced to leave his siblings despite not wanting to. Dabi would later worry about how he was feeling the same way he had with his siblings when it came to Midoriya. For now, he just needed to get Midoriya to go into the warp. He thought about putting a hand on the boy's shoulder, but he dismissed the idea, remembering how the boy had froze at that contact before. He didn't want to set off the kid considering that state he was in. Then he looked at Midoriya's hand and his own. Yes, that would work. Midoriya had said that he helped with the pain in his hand. And Midoriya seemed to like holding his hand, if the boy not letting go while he was asleep was any indicator. So Dabi gently grabbed Midoriya's hand. He let out a sigh of relief when he didn't get punched and Midoriya continued to breathe. He slowly brought the hand up higher, taking note of the vast difference between his hand that had purple scars held together with staples and Midoriya's pale hands with a few scars crossing over his skin. Then Dabi stepped forward, pulling Midoriya with him. The boy let himself get pulled and still had no response. Not a moment later, the two of them walked through the warp gate. A concerned villain and a young tired hero, hand in hand. Dabi was pleased to note that when he walked through the warp, the only person he needed to stop was Toga. The girl had practically rushed forward, probably intending to hug and possibly stab Midoriya in greeting. He had to dodge a knife when he grabbed Toga and made sure she didn't get too close to Midoriya. Toga calmed down. You can't exactly say, hi, yet. The girl pouted and looked at him. Why not? Izuku-kun is finally here and you're even holding his hand. Before Dabi could respond, Toga was trying to push past Dabi but was stopped by Magna. The woman leaned down and whispered something into Toga's ear that made the girl stop and actually looked at Izuku. He saw as Toga's smile slowly faded away and was replaced by a look of concern. And the girl didn't fight Magna as she led her away to sit at the bar. Quietly they watched as Dabi led Midoriya to the couch. The boy's head was still hanging low. There was no reaction when Dabi made him sit on the couch. And a few of them thought that when Dabi went to let go of Midoriya's hand, he looked hesitant before doing so. In almost silent agreement, they all converged towards each other at the bar and Dabi came toward them. Even Shigaraki had put away his game console and Kurogiri was near them behind the bar. Hey Dabi, what's up with the little dude? Spinner asked. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Wahap dash. I don't know, Dabi snapped with a glare. He was like that when I found him standing in front of all the medicine sheet. He didn't respond to anything I did. I don't know why he's like that. Medicine sheet? Yeah, and Dabi took the things he had in his pockets and placed them on the counter. There were a lot of items. It seemed that Dabi had rather large pockets and used them to their fullest potential in stealing from the store. Twice, Kurogiri and Shigaraki carefully went through the pile of different items. Shigaraki picked up a tube of burn cream with 2 fingers. Is he hurt? Everyone looked over to where Midoriya was on the couch, still unresponsive. Yeah, I think he is.